Chapter 626, End of the Banquet. Within a few breaths, the entire flaming river trading point was flooded by the flame torrent. All the architecture seemed blurry inside the trading point. All those people from the other tribes who still remained inside the trading point were all frightened. The sudden pressure made them tremble with fear. At this moment, their leaders who were still inside the flaming river castle were all suddenly caught off guard and lost their backbones. They didn't know what to do, so they could only huddle with their team, like little chicks gathering together in the strong winds, gritting their teeth while trying to fight off the cold. They were all worried about what happened inside the castle and worried what might have happened to their leader, but even now, they did not hear any whistles. They did not dare to act recklessly on their own will without hearing any whistle cues. Their chief had emphasized this more than a few times. They were not to act recklessly. Now, something unexpected had happened, so even if they heard the whistle from another tribe, they would also rush over immediately because their own chief might also be facing the same trouble. Maybe an accident happened and their chief couldn't blow the whistle. But now, out of all the major tribes that came here, they didn't hear a single whistle. The people who were observing from outside the trading point were all shocked when they saw the entire trading point bathed in bright fire. If they didn't sense that this unusual light came from something similar to a fire seed, and knew that it wouldn't injure anyone or anything, they would have rushed in right away. "What's happening in there?" someone yelled. Even if it wasn't an unusual fire seed and wouldn't hurt anyone or anything, it still had a repelling force towards all the other tribes. This made them feel very uncomfortable. It wasn't there before. Why did it suddenly appear? What should we do? Should we go over and look? Wait, we can't go in yet. Another person tried his best to speak through gritted teeth. They didn't hear any whistles, and there was no way the chiefs of those few tribes were all destroyed. Even if they didn't believe anything else, they still had faith in their own chief and hunt leaders. How could their own leaders be so useless? Wait, we can only wait. Wait for the sound of the whistle, or wait for the situation over there to calm down first. About another half an hour had passed. The bright light from the flames slowly dimmed and disappeared. Inside the flaming river castle, the enormous flame giant also slowly faded away and disappeared. The energy from the flaming horn fire seed that filled the entire atmosphere also disappeared. Seeing this, the people from other tribes who chose to stay behind were finally able to relax. Is it finally over? They were not sure, but they had been shocked. Who knows what was going to happen next? Some people who stood on the roads belonged to the Flaming Horn tribe. After the light from the fire had disappeared, they felt refreshed and full of energy. There was still unfading excitement in their eyes, and they looked like believers who had just been bathed in holy light. This was completely opposite to the tense faces of the people from the other tribes. The people from the Zit tribe who were still hiding inside the house also peeked out from behind the blinds. Although they noticed that the situation outside had calmed down, they still didn't dare to come out. They were timid and cautious, and they had to be sure that there was no longer any threat outside. Then they would come out. The people who were left outside the flaming river castle also rushed toward the Beast Fang gate. They wanted to make sure that their chiefs were alive and well. When they saw the people come out from the inside, they finally relaxed. Although they did not appear to be very happy, they were not hurt. That was enough for them. They found their spines, so they were no longer worried. Now they were just waiting for their chief's orders. The flaming horns inside the castle were all cleaning up after the sacrifice, but the people from the other tribes no longer had the mood to stay any longer. They led their teams out with stern expressions. They greeted the people outside the Beast Fang gate and headed back to the courtyard that the flaming horns had prepared for them. The people of the Ming tribe returned to their courtyard. After hearing the reports from his subordinates, he waved his hands and gestured for the others to leave. Only Huang Yi was allowed to stay behind. "Did you feel it just now?" Fu Gui asked. Huang Yi was startled. He did not understand what the chief meant. According to the people who came to report, regardless of whether the Flaming Horn tribe's people were inside the trading point or outside, they experienced the same changes, Fu Gui said. "So what you mean is, Huang Yi made a burning gesture with his hands. Fu Gui nodded. Not just them, I even heard from the people who were observing the Flaming Horn headquarters that the people there also experienced the same changes. Huang Yi's eyes widened. They're so far though. It's on the other side of the river. Even them. This is also what I care about. Fu Gui's eyes expressed their deep contemplation. He was becoming more and more curious about the fire seed's other form. Doesn't matter, we will not follow our original plan. I plan to stay here for a little longer, Fu Gui said. Initially, they only wanted to see what the Flaming River trading point looked like and also find out the Flaming Horn tribe's true strength. They wanted to see whether they could really host such a grand feast. In their plan, they did not want to stay here for too long. They were not familiar with the Flaming River area, and rarely did they send any expedition teams here. This place had always been a far place marked with poverty. If they could not obtain enough information about a place, they naturally did not stay for too long. But now, Fu Gui suddenly had a change of plans. He no longer cared about the food they had in the Flaming River Grand Feast. Now, the only things he cared about were, first, the green weapons in the Flaming Horn's hands. Second, and also the most important, what he cared about the most, the fire seed's alternative form. Fu Gui had a feeling that he would regret if he didn't clear up his doubts and questions about this. Maybe our tribe might end up making the same decision the Flaming Horns made. Fu Gui sighed. Huang Yi understood what Fu Gui meant by the same decision. He couldn't help but worry. But the fire seed is a matter concerning the entire tribe. We should think more about it before making the decision. Of course, but I have a feeling that at the end, we will still decide to take the path the Flaming Horns took. Fu Gui was disappointed, but seeing how Huang Yi's face was still full of disagreement, he said, "Why do you think the Flaming Horn tribe publicized this secret? It had been so long, they didn't even say it back when they were still in the fearsome beast forest. Why did they suddenly decide to publicize it? The Flaming Horns want to show off? Or, they want to use this matter to get something from the major tribes?" Huang Yi tried to guess the answer. Fu Gui couldn't help but smile. "No, that's not it." With those words, Fu Gui lifted his hands and pointed in one direction. That was where the desert was located. Rock Hill City? Huang Yi asked. More than that, Fu Gui's expression was very unusual. Huang Yi had never seen him like this before. He looked like he was anticipating something, but he also looked worried. But more anticipation than worry. The other side of the sea, the Mang tribe was different from the other stronger tribes. Every single one of their chiefs had always been carefully selected. They were probably not the strongest tribe and might not even make it to the top 3 in strength. But one thing was for sure, they were smart and far-sighted. They did not know when this began, but it had always been the method they used to select a chief in the Ming tribe. If Szechuan knew about this, he would definitely express his admiration. No wonder they were one of the most powerful tribes in the central region. Not every tribe could achieve this kind of understanding. And it was clear now how the Ming tribe had been able to develop so steadily. Even though the chief of the Ming tribe might not be able to do everything perfectly, they were not at all limited in their thinking. Sometimes, they had to admit that their leader, be it the chief of the shaman, had a very keen sense of smell. He continued to speak even before Huang Yi could figure out what on the other side of the sea meant. The tribes in the Flaming River region will definitely stand beside the Flaming Horns and plead to be their ally after today's incident. Others did not matter, but all those tribes that came over today are definitely on the Flaming Horns side. Huang Yi completely agreed with Fu Gui's words. Perhaps some people were thinking how unbelievable it was that the Flaming Horn tribe were able to attract all those people by a simple meal. But to them who had once also hosted a showing-off feast, they knew clearly that the poorer a tribe was, the easier it was for them to be attracted by a simple meal. This was why many tribes that had power chose to host grand feasts rather than battles. A simple meal could help them achieve their goals. How easy was that? But these small tribes were not stupid. They could tell immediately whether a tribe was really powerful. The Flaming Horns grand feast made them all satisfied, and especially after experiencing today's giant fire. Although those people were afraid back when it was happening, Their desire to side with the Flaming Horns would only grow stronger. The stronger the Flaming Horns were, the safer they felt. Many of the other tribes' people didn't think too much. They only believed in what they had seen or experienced, and if they wanted to persuade them to fight the Flaming Horn tribe, it was not very likely in a short period of time. This was the weird characteristic of many tribesmen. Sometimes they were just so stubborn and stupid that there was nothing to be done. If the Flaming Horn tribe could gather and unite all the tribes in this area, it would also be a massive threat. This Huang Yi understood. We both know the Flaming Horn's power. They are not any weaker than us, but if they unite all of these tribes, they no longer have to fear any other tribes. But they still chose to publicize this secret about the fire seed because they are afraid. Fu Gui looked toward Huang Yi. What do you think? Where did those Flaming Horns that walked out from the desert come from? Of course from the day. Huang Yi suddenly stopped, his eyes widened in shock. You mean, they came from the other side of the sea? Fu Gui did not reply, but his expression already gave away an affirmative answer. Fu Gui's guess was not wrong. Actually, the Flaming Horn tribe also decided to publicize this secret after many discussions. Before, they wanted to keep it a secret from all the other tribes and only tell it to their allies. They even thought about getting more benefits from other tribes through this secret, but at the end, they still decided to use this method. The two continents were already getting closer to each other. It was only a matter of time before they would find out. Conflict would break out sooner or later. By then, it would be too difficult if the Flaming Horns were to face it alone. There were still too few people in the Flaming Horn tribe, and they couldn't even be compared with an ordinary city over there. And on the other side of the sea, the 6 aristocrats united as one rope. Every aristocrat in the cities also brought in some tribes, but the tribes over there were quite different from the tribes here. It was impossible for them to give up on the aristocrats and support the people here. And the tribes here, according to what Shashuan knew about them, although there was a lot of friction between them in the past, once slave owners were involved, they would definitely stand on the same side even if they were the Longboat Tribe and Tanshan Tribe. No matter how much they despised seeing the Flaming Horns, between the slave masters and them, they would still choose the Flaming Horns. Tonight, the people from the major tribes that were still staying inside the trading area did not sleep well. They all had their own guesses, and were getting even closer to the truth. The matter about the fire seed made them frustrated. The ancient fire seed had disappeared, but the fire seed still existed. But it just took another form, one in which blood and fire came from the same source. This the Flaming Horn tribe already proved to them. Innovation was always accompanied by fear. Choosing this meant that they had to give up other things that they had long been accustomed to. This was a great challenge for the tribesmen. They worried and thought deeply. They were not sure if the new change was good or bad for their tribe. It might be a perfect option for other tribes, but it might not suit them well. The ancient fire seed protected the entire tribe but also limited them. Many things they did were limited because of it. But one day if it was possible for the fire seed to not be limited to one place, and if everyone in the tribe did not need to gather in the same place throughout the entire year, if they could enjoy such freedom, what would the future be like? The Flaming Horns had chosen such a revolutionary path, and even the Drumming Tribe and Rain Tribe followed in their steps. Who's next? Chapter 627. Making a name. After the Flaming River Grand Banquet ended, the Flaming River Trading Point was officially open. In front of the few entrances were giant stone plates carved with the new rules of the trading point. Every new face that came by were gestured by the Flaming Horn guards to read the rules first, or else they wouldn't even know the reason if they were killed inside the trading point. Once their lives were involved, those who didn't care at first immediately went back to take a closer read. These new faces were people who followed the few major tribes when they came to attend the grand feast. Before, they couldn't even enter, but when they heard that the Flaming River Trading Point was officially opened, they thought about it for an entire night before they finally made the bold decision to go in. If they already made it this far and were accustomed to expeditions, they had a heart for adventure and were full of curiosity, or else they wouldn't have followed them until now. When they were hiding in the distance and observing the flaming river trading point, their curiosity made them want to know more, but because they couldn't, they had to hold back the urge. Now, they could finally see everything inside the flaming river trading point. None of the 24 tribes that came left. All of them planned to stay here and trade. Some wanted to leave later while others were waiting for the perfect time to go, like the Zit tribe. They didn't leave yesterday because they overate and couldn't run fast. There were also all sorts of dangers outside. Now that night had passed, they had finished digesting most of the food, and they also finished up all the leftovers they took from inside the flaming river castle. Now, they were only waiting for those people outside to come into the trading point, then they would leave. If they left earlier, those people outside who had bad intentions might stop them on the way, so the best way was to wait for those curious people to enter first and then leave. That was the safest option. Some other smaller tribes thought the same way too. They were not good at most things, but they knew how to determine the best time to escape. The people who just entered the flaming river trading point were already attracted to all sorts of sturdy goods. Whoa, look over there. What a giant piece of meat. Judging by the color, I don't think I've tried this before. Is this what they call fearsome beast meat? Fearsome beast meat? These 3 words were indeed a great shock to them. Even if they often went on expedition trips, they rarely saw any fearsome beasts, unless they went to the fearsome beast forest or the desert. But how many of them were bold enough to enter the fearsome beast forest? Even back then the Wanchai tribe rarely ventured there. So if they were not stupid or out of their minds, they would stay away from that fierce land. As for the desert, even fewer people went there. What is this meat? Someone with widened eyes asked. He went closer to smell the bloody meat as he asked. His face expressed his fascination. This must be delicious. Giant bear, the flaming horn tribesman who was selling it said slowly. Giant bear? How giant is it? Someone asked curiously. What is this other meat? Before they even got an answer from the seller, another person asked again. That's the meat of a giant claw beast. The person in charge of that stall replied calmly. Giant claw? How big is giant? Like that one over there. The person who was selling pointed to the stall opposite from his. It was full of beast fangs and beast claws. It's that third giant beast claw if you count from this side. Oh, another group of people rushed over together. So this is the claw of the giant claw beast? Yes. The uncle who was selling the beast fangs and claws smiled at them with his dazzling teeth. He took the giant claw down from where it was and let these people who had never seen the real world take a closer look. The people who rushed over touched the beast claw from top to bottom, then their hands went from bottom to top again. Their eyes stared with awe at the giant beast claw that was twice as tall as them. What beast does this claw belong to? Another person asked from the side. That's a beast fang. This beast fang is so huge. It's okay, it's not that big. The man who was selling the beast fang grinned at them with his white teeth. Would you like to buy this? The people who were growing excited suddenly felt like they were splashed with a bucket of ice. Their expressions were all frozen, dumbfounded. They were too rushed when they came, so to ease their travel when they were tailing the major tribes, they didn't bring enough money. They felt around their pockets and only found a few glittering gems, stones, or shells. There was some jade, but they were not of decent quality. They really couldn't get much out of their pockets. At first, they wanted to trick the flaming horns about how valuable their goods were, but seeing how the flaming horns were capable of hosting a showing-off feast, how was it possible for them to not have seen these? As they recalled everything they had seen since they entered the flaming river trading point, they didn't dare to trick the flaming horns. They thought about the rules that were carved on the stone plate when they entered the trading point, and then thought again about how carefree the uncle who was selling the beast fangs and beast's horns was, how effortlessly he moved the giant claw over for them to see. You'll get killed, alright, but if they came all the way here without bringing anything back to show off, They felt sorry for themselves. But to rob? Some of them looked around with fierce glares and glanced around them. They were searching for those people from the smaller tribes who came over to attend the feast. Some were tribes that even had trouble filling their own stomachs. If they wanted to rob anyone, it would be them. Indeed, it made no sense to rob those powerful tribes. Even idiots wouldn't do it. But when they began their search for these people, the Z tribe and other smaller tribes had already left. If they wanted to chase after them, it would be too difficult. Some people did not want to stop there. They gathered their people and left the Flaming River trading point. Due to the rules and regulations inside, they didn't dare make a move, so they could only search outside. Meanwhile, as these people went to search, the chiefs of the major tribes, the Mang tribe, the Eight Limbs tribe, the Longboat tribe, the Thousand Masks tribe, the Feather tribe, the Tanshan tribe, and the Hua tribe all walked into the Flaming River Castle. But this time, they did not meet in the open-air venue they used before. Instead, they were led into a special meeting room inside the Flaming River Castle. Only a few of the chiefs entered, and on the Flaming Horn side, only Guihe and Shashwan went in. Shashwan stood up and stretched. After such a busy day yesterday, he even had to deal with some things that came after the event. He didn't get enough sleep, and the ancestor's flame giant also consumed a lot of his energy, so he was feeling exhausted now. When Shashwan stretched his arms, the people in the meeting room all looked at him. When he felt those stares, Shashwan said, "Don't worry. I'm just stretching." They didn't care. Only when Shashwan finished stretching and yawning did they emotionlessly withdraw their stares. They had no choice. Yesterday's event terrified them. They didn't know what happened to the flame giant, but they knew that Shashwan was the one who created it. With a simple pull of the sleeves, he flooded the entire trading point with a flame torrent that left a deep negative impression on them. When Shashwan stretched his arms, they couldn't help but feel anxious. Guihe understood this feeling, but he knew that the ancestral flame giant rarely appeared unless they were holding a sacrifice. When he noticed their reactions, he wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. When the ancestral flame giant appeared yesterday, he was standing beside Shashwan. At that time, he was so shocked that his entire back was covered in a cold sweat. After gathering his emotions, Guihe looked at Shashwan, and seeing Shashwan nod in response, he said, "Let's start." The stone door of the meeting room slammed shut with a boom and shut out all the sounds from within. It was only until nighttime when the stone door was opened again. The few chiefs had perplexed looks on their faces. It wasn't clear whether they were happy or mad. They left with their people on the 5th day after the Flaming River trading point officially opened, and the curious travelers who followed them here also left one after another. With their help in spreading the news, the Flaming River trading point's name would soon spread far and wide across the continent. To the people who lived on this continent, news about the destruction of a tribe by another only lasted for a short time. Most tribes' people only talked about other tribes whom they were not familiar with or lived too far away when they were bored. If there were any other exciting news, they would immediately turn their attention towards it. But when it came to eating, they could discuss it for a very long time. Some people even counted with their fingers and tried to recall how many tribes hosted showing-off feasts in the past few years, especially those expedition teams that belonged to different trading points. When they had spare time, they would gather together and discuss these matters. "I wonder what they ate at the Flaming River Grand Banquet." I heard even some major tribes praise the dishes. Wow! That means the Flaming River trading point is very powerful. Not the Flaming River trading point. The Flaming Horn tribe is powerful. That means the same thing. Have you guys been there? We know people from another tribe who went before. So those rumors are all true? A beast fang this big? A beast claw this size? Those are all real? Someone stood up and tried to show how big it was. PFFT. Not that small. It's way bigger than what you think. Too bad they didn't bring enough goods to trade. They couldn't bring a giant beast claw back. Those claws, hey, they don't even need to be polished. They could be used directly as weapons. I heard it could even split rocks in an instant. It was rare for that person to catch the attention of so many, so he was delighted. He cleared his throat and continued to tell them all about what he heard. Gradually, More and more people gathered to listen, and some even made strange sounds like SSSSSS. Huh, yeah, those people who went there didn't have any goods to exchange, but they didn't even try robbing? Someone asked, "Are you sure you'd robbed the flaming horns?" The crowd looked instantly at the person who asked the stupid question. In their minds, the Flaming Horn tribe was already at a new height. Their rank was not any lower than the few major tribes from the central region. PFFT, when did I say I would rob the Flaming Horns? Am I that stupid? The person who asked tried to explain. What I meant was to rob those smaller tribes. No way. The tribes who lived in that region were too familiar with the geography there. I heard that when they tried to chase after some of them, they couldn't even catch up and lost them. The person in the center immediately caught on to the topic and continued to blabber on. Why not? We find time to go on an expedition trip there. A leader of some tribe's expedition team said as he listened. I had the same thought. Let's go together. The leader of another expedition team said, haha. We can gather more people. It's not easy to rob those smaller tribes. They're very tricky and clever. The person who spoke only repeated what he heard once, but when that person told him about the smaller tribes and said how tricky and clever they were, he was speaking through gritted teeth. That person said that whenever they were chasing those people in the forest, they were so close, but those people always succeeded and escaped. They even almost fell into an abyss, so that's why, when we go to the Flaming River trading point in the future, we should bring more people. If people fell into the abyss, at least there would be others there to save them, and there would still be enough people to chase after the smaller tribes. Someone came over said with a professional tone. Their plans were excellent. However, it was still unknown who would suffer when the time came. Chapter 628, New Expedition Plans. News of the Flaming River trading point spread across the continent. It didn't matter if it was the few major trading points in the central region, or the trading point at the grasslands, people were talking about it. This was arranged by the major tribe, also something they promised Flaming Horn. As it became more famous, more people visited. In the first 3 days, very few people came, but soon after, people came in groups. These expedition teams from far away all came with their own objectives, hence they brought many goods with them. They would never return empty-handed. These tribes traded for a lot of beast hides and fearsome beast meat. Even beast claws and fangs were popular items. Now, Flaming Horn did not have to store and accumulate their extra beast hides, merely sending all their extra stock to be stored at the Flaming River trading point. They didn't have to bring their goods across a long journey for trade now. All they had to do was guard the Flaming Horn main village and the trading area, then enter the forest when it was their shift to hunt. Overall, Flaming Horn saved a lot of time and physical labor. This is even more convenient than the time we were on the other side of the sea. Duo King had just returned from a hunt. He left some of the game at the village, then extras were processed so that beast hide, flesh, horns, bones and teeth were all separated and then brought to the trading point for the people in charge of the stalls to display them. The party that arrived 2 days ago hasn't left yet. They were waiting for this batch of beast meat. 2 more groups arrived today, saying they're reserving giant claw beast claws for themselves first. Duo Lee shrugged, unsuppressed glee painted on his face. Our goods are superior. These people are all willing to wait a few days here just for our stuff. Yep, that's because we're Flaming Horn. Would we ever provide subpar goods? Duo King smiled so hard his eyes squinted. He turned to Duo Lee. Do you think Tay would envy us if they heard about our lives now? They'd be jealous to death. The 2 older men sat on the upper floors of Flaming River Castle, looking far away into the scenery and sighed at the same time. I wonder when we'll get to meet them again. Suddenly, Duo King saw a flock of birds fluttering out of a point in the forest, far away. It was a distance away from the trading point and the vegetation was dense there. Is someone coming? Duo Lee also saw the movement. Do you think it's a trading party from far away or one of the tribes around Flaming River? Asked Duo King. Duo Lee thought for a moment. More likely to be a trading party from far away. I think so too. Duo King slapped his thigh rhythmically. humming a hunting song. He was very relaxed. Once the number of people at the trading point increased, they grew more vigilant in watching the surrounding forest too. If they saw someone but they weren't targeting the trading point, Flaming Horn would not initiate anything. But if anyone was bold enough to touch the trading point, they would be killed. At least these expedition parties knew they could not possibly overpower Flaming Horn, so they set their eyes on the smaller tribes in the area. They tried to get some stuff from these smaller parties, but it was too bad that anyone who could survive in this area for so long already evolved to have their own survival tactics. The drumming tribe that arrived 1,000 years ago after the major geographical change didn't count, nor did the newly arrived Rain tribe. The tribesmen who had been here a lot earlier than that had ancestors that truly fought countless fearsome beasts. At the time, the Flaming River did not exist. There was no crack in the ground. Both sides of the river were one. Being so close to the forest and beasts, how would it be possible to survive without their own survival tactics? That was why when Flaming Horn told them that there would be many strangers visiting the area, the tribesmen from smaller tribes did not really panic as others expected them to. They looked well prepared. One should not underestimate the small Zit tribe either. They had smaller numbers, and on the surface looked poor and unassuming. However, the Zit tribe could comfortably offer something to be traded for food at the trading point every single time. Then, they successfully returned to their tribe safely afterwards, even robbing an expedition party who'd planned to rob the Zit tribesmen, in retaliation once. Right. Duo Li teasingly leaned over to Duo Kang. Dad, I heard Grand Elder's planning for an expedition? Duo Kang raised an eyebrow. What, you want to go? I know you can't make it, so if I get to go, I'll tell you the stories of what I did on the expedition. Duo Li had his argument ready. Since the trading point was still new, even though Zheng Luo was here, he still needed more help. Zheng Luo and Dao, the two former chiefs, were assigned the trading point and main village respectively. The two major hunt leaders, Ta and Duo Kang, had to take turns leading hunt parties or patrol teams and sometimes visiting the trading point to help out. That was why they definitely couldn't leave with Szechuan. Now that Duo Kang couldn't make it, Duo Li was itching to get his father to talk to Szechuan so he could join the expedition team. A limited number of people could go with, and he was worried he wasn't among the candidates. Now that both sides of the tribe had integrated, competition was intense. In just the younger generation, there were too many people stronger than him. He couldn't even beat Mao, Moer, Yang and Guang etc. Duo Kang was angered the moment he saw Duo Li's hopeful face, slapping his cheek hard. Go fight for your spot on your own. That's none of my business. A long journey like that was dangerous. If he wasn't strong enough, how could he still think of joining the party? Forget about slowing the team down. Worst case scenario, he could die on the trip. Duo Li, who had just taken a slap from his father, pursed his lips. He had expected this answer anyway. He hung his head and sighed, then straightened up. Did they want to fight? Well, he refused to believe that it would be impossible. At this moment, Szechuan had just exited the medicine store of the Flaming Horn village. He had planned to make a large telescope, but due to some minor imperfections, it did not work. That was why he made the polished convex lens into a magnifying glass about 2 palms big and gave it to Guizi instead. Although she had already gotten the power of inheritance as a shamaness, in the past she hadn't awakened her totemic power yet. Now that the fire seed had been merged, she was still weaker than other people. For example, Xiaoxin could see the tiny strands of a grass rope, but Guizi could not unless she strained hard. However, Guizi was talented in concocting herbal medicine. Before inheriting the shaman's position, she was the one who concocted a majority of medicine in the tribe. She even invented new medicine that were more effective, all successfully made into convenient, portable pills with longer shelf lives. In terms of this, she was even more capable than the former shaman. The old man was proud of her because of this. Sometimes, Guizi needed to study minor structures on various herbs and it was exhausting. Szechuan's magnifying glass solved this problem effectively. Guizi also provided a lot of medicine for this expedition. Although making medicine for expedition teams was one of the shaman's jobs, Because she was close with him and he'd helped her before, she stuffed 3 extra clay bottles into his hand. There were 500 pills per bottle, all made in the last 20 days. These were venom and poison antidotes, especially snake venom. Temperatures were rising at this time of the year, so there would be many venomous animals and insects in the forest. New pills, definitely good for neutralizing venom. I'm just not sure how strong it is. Guizi wasn't sure because these hadn't been in use yet. She'd consumed some before, so she knew of its antidote properties, just not sure of its magnitude. No problem, I'll test it and tell you the results when I return. Shashwan carefully put the 3 bottles of medicine into his beast hide pouch and descended the mountain to the crop fields. The 1,000-grain gold seemed to be doing well. The fertilizers had been prepared beforehand according to Jiju's previous suggestions. Fermented fearsome beast meat and bones, especially beasts that liked to eat grass, moss and shoots. Some bone marrow was also extracted to be added inside. In addition to the previous experience of Chi-Chi and the rest, the success rate of 1,000-grain gold was very high. However, the next part of the story was the most important part. Jiju once said that every roadblock of the 1,000-grain gold's development were key moments. As long as they survived, they would have growth spurts. The ones in the fields had passed the first roadblock now, so they were taller than Shashwan's waist. At this rate, they would hit the second block soon. Afterwards, they'd grow even faster. Shashwan planned to observe the progress of the 1,000-grain gold, only leaving after the second block. If their trip was short, they might even be able to make it back by the third block and see the grains on the plants. As he looked out into the patch of green, Shashwan thought, even if only 1/10 of this survives in the end, it's already a cause for celebration. His plan for the expedition was to travel downstream along the Flaming River and explore the area. They would be staying here for a long time. In the past, they did not have the resources to travel far. Now, they must explore further to get an idea of the region. There were not many tribes upstream of the Flaming River. It was better to travel downstream because they knew that the number of tribes would increase downstream. After looking at the empty spot on his animal skin scroll, he rolled it back up. They did not plan to travel too far, just to spend a little time looking around. In the event of an invasion, it was important to know where the enemy came from. Chapter 629, Another Use for the Water Moonstone. After visiting the crop fields, Shashwan headed somewhere else. Since he was going to be away for a while, and they hadn't set the date of return, he must ensure that any loose ends were settled first. When he was heading to the beast pens, he met Ao, who was coincidentally looking for him. Ao was holding a bulging beast skin bag filled to the brim. The drumming tribe brought this over, as debt repayment. See how many regular water moonstones it's worth. Ao handed the bag over. Shashwan took a look inside the bag but couldn't see much because of the bright sunlight. He headed into a wooden hut nearby with Ao. It was a temporary shelter for the animal keepers and patrol teams who passed by. Seeing Shashwan and Ao approaching, everyone resting inside quickly left and took initiative to guard the area, not letting anyone approach. They knew that Ao and Shashwan must have something to discuss. It didn't matter if it was secret, without permission. They would do their best to stay away and prevent other people from eavesdropping. After entering the hut, Shashwan closed the windows and only left one open for ventilation. Now that it was dark, the water moonstones inside were a lot more obvious. Not bright enough, inconsistent transparency and quality. One look was enough for Shashwan to determine the quality of the water moonstones within the bag. Good quality water moonstones were as bright as light bulbs, plus they looked clean and clear. This was why they could be used as trading currency. However, some of these in the bag were very dull, not bright enough for practical usage. Not just a light bulb, they were dimmer than fire torches. Some barely met the brightness requirements, but they were murky. Only barely 1/10 of the stones truly met their standards. The drumming tribesmen must have chosen these from their stocks to pay us. I think these must be the best stones they have, though this is all they could afford, said Ao. After merging with the fire seed, The drumming tribe slowly dissociated their mindsets from the primitive fire seed to its powers already inside them to generate water moonstones. Unfortunately, within such a short time period, the water moonstones made still did not meet previous standards. This was understandable to Ao. "What are you all going to do about it?" asked Shashwan. "We'll accept it. Since the quality of these aren't up to standard, we can't price it like before." But when we built Flaming River Castle, the drumming tribe helped us many times and did not accept any gifts from Flaming Horn. "I was thinking about valuing them at 1/3, said Ao. He meant to value these water moonstones at 1/3 the price of regular stones. If he did not do this and only accepted functional stones, then only 1/10 of the bag drumming tribe paid had value. The truth was that the dull water moonstones were basically worthless and unusable. Actually, I was satisfied with the drumming tribe as their neighbors. In comparison to the Wanchai tribe, he was definitely happier with the drumming tribe. Plus they'd helped Flaming Horns many times. Now that drumming tribe had just rebuilt their houses and undergone major changes, they weren't living their best lives now either. That was why Ao did not want to trouble them too much. But that was just his opinion. He still wanted to listen to Shashwan's opinion. He had no problem with it, but if Shashwan disagreed, it was still a number. "Sure, just carry on as you planned." Shashwan handed the water moonstones back to Ao. "Keep the duller ones separately." "I know." Ao did not plan to use the dimmer stones anyway. They couldn't even be used for reading anything one palm's distance away, let alone light up one's path. "Bring the dimmer stones to the crop fields later, leave them there and see if any insects are attracted," said Shashwan. With more crops in the fields, there were more insects too. Although there were people in charge of killing pests and even the green ducks eating the insects in the fields, those were just during the day. They had a pest problem for nocturnal insects. Some people used fire torches to chase them away, which was effective because most living things feared fire. However, it was impossible to keep this up for an entire night. Perhaps due to high human activity in the Flaming Horn tribe, most birds did not approach the village, especially not at night. This caused the nocturnal bug problem to proliferate. The warm weather, moist river banks and large crop fields were paradise for bugs. The ones flown over from the fearsome beast forest area were especially annoying. Coincidentally, these nearly useless water moonstones could be used. They couldn't be used practically, but they were still glowing at a brightness equivalent to a phone screen. Perhaps they would attract some nocturnal bugs. There were all sorts of insects. Many were attracted to light, but they weren't as dumb as the flying ones that would kill themselves in fire. They were clever enough to avoid the hot source of light, fire torches. That was why Shashwan thought it was worth an attempt with these stones. When Shashwan mentioned it, Ao understood. He was the chief after all. "You mean those nocturnal insects might like the glowing water moonstones?" Ao had once walked outside holding a water moonstone. He had met many insects flying near him too, though he thought it was because of him, not the stone. Now that Shashwan mentioned it, could it be the glow of the stone? "Many bugs that come out at night like the moon, but the moon is too far away. But I don't know if they'll be attracted to the stones," explained Shashwan. "I see." I was impressed, thinking, no wonder he's the Grand Elder, he knows so much. "We'll know once we try it." Shashwan wasn't sure either. There were definitely bugs that were attracted to light. He just wasn't sure if these glowing stones were bright enough. "The drumming tribe surely knows about this, right?" asked Ao. "Not necessarily. The drumming tribe used to be protected by their primitive fire seeds. Most pests might not approach, and the river was still there, so insects from the forest might not be able to fly over. The insects originally from that side shouldn't be enough to cause problems. Now that both sides are closer to each other, and more insects might be flying over, they're still very conservative with the usage of their water moonstones. It's more likely they don't know of this, but we can ask," said Shashwan. "You have a point." I almost forgot how intimidating the aura of a primitive fire seed was to other living things. The drumming tribe's residential area wasn't as scattered as Flaming Horn too, so the fire seed's effects must have been strong. I went to the house by the river with the animal skin bag. The drumming chief, Fan Mu, was waiting there. He looked anxious. They were well aware that the quality of these moonstones weren't as good as before, but this was already the best batch they had in a while. The drumming tribesmen inside all looked up expectantly when Ao approached. "What did Grand Elder Shashwan say?" asked Fan Mu. "We'll value it at 1/3 of the previous price," said Ao. They were all surprised. To them, they would have felt guilty even if it was just 1/10. After his surprise, Fan Mu said solemnly, "Thank you." They knew that this was Flaming Horn doing them a favor. If they brought these stones somewhere else, they would have been worth less than 1/10 of the initial price. They were grateful for this. The Flaming Horns were good people. "The next batch of water moonstones we bring over will definitely be better," promised Fan Mu. They were getting better at making water moonstones. The moon was growing brighter these nights too, so the production process was easier. Their quality would definitely improve, for even they were embarrassed to give the Flaming Horns poor quality stones as debt repayment. "Right, what does your tribe do with the subpar water moonstones?" asked Ao. "Tough, we keep them and use it ourselves," replied an embarrassed Fan Mu. The stones that could not fulfill minimum brightness were almost useless. If they did not hide it in their own houses, what was the other option? To sell them? Wouldn't that just be shameless? "The stones, if you can't use them, don't throw them away," said Ao hesitantly. He wasn't sure if Shashwan's night plans would succeed. If they did, they obviously would need more dim stones. These stones were worth almost nothing. They could be counted as recycling trash, eh? The drumming tribesmen looked at him, puzzled. "Our Grand Elder might need some stones like that." Ao wanted to tell them about a plan but held his tongue and used Shashwan's name instead. The drumming tribe might really not know if the stones could attract insects, but we're not sure if it'll work, so he has to test it first. "We'll let you know later," added Ao. Sure, said Fan Mu quickly. After returning to the drumming tribe, Fan Mu told the shaman this. Upon hearing that the stones were valued at 1/3 the original price, the shaman was very grateful to Flaming Horn. The news about the dimmer stones was a surprise too. "Although we don't know what Flaming Horn's Grand Elder Shashwan wants to do, I hope he succeeds," said the shaman. "If they still need more, we can give them what we have." "Yeah, I think so too," said Fan Mu. The failed water moonstones from their practice sessions were useless anyway. If Flaming Horn needed them, they would give all of it to Flaming Horn as a gesture of thanks. That night, the two moons in the sky weren't crescents anymore and much brighter. However, they were still far from full moon. If there were 2 full moons, the dim water moonstones wouldn't be able to outshine the moons and their effects would greatly decrease, so it was also a good thing that it was a cloudy night. Most of the night, both moons were covered by clouds, so it made Shashwan's plan easier. Shashwan looked up at the clouds, then headed over to the crop fields with a bag of water moonstones. Chapter 630, Supper. When Shashwan arrived at the crop fields, Ao and tonight's guards in charge of the fields were already waiting. They were all holding tools in their hands. Other than their own axes, knives or other hunting weapons, they carried specialized tools for farming like vine woven into a large net, nets attached to long poles, etc. They usually only used these during the day but rarely at night. "All ready?" asked Shashwan. "Yep, we were just waiting for you," said Ao. The guards who were called over were confused, not knowing why Ao wanted to see them. However, they would still obey their 2 elders' instructions. Shashwan surveyed the fields and asked one of the guards, "Which part usually has the most bugs at night?" "Which part?" The guard thought for a moment and pointed. "There." That area was where their more valuable crops were planted, mostly given by Jeju. Even the 1,000-grain gold were planted nearby. "We'll test that area then." Shashwan went over with his water moonstones. The 2 moons in the sky had just appeared but then were quickly covered by clouds once again. The land darkened with the lack of moonlight. The chirping insects were silenced momentarily by the sudden disappearance of the moons but continued chirping. It was dark, but since everyone was very familiar with the farms, they did not need to worry about accidentally falling into any of the drainage trenches. In addition, although it was dark, There was a small fire built on the ground which was enough to help them see. Shashwan did not start right on the edge of the fields but instead only stopped a distance away from the crop fields. He took out the subpar products from his bag, then arranged them together in a circle. "Put out the fire, and everyone back away," said Shashwan. Everyone obeyed his instructions, even putting out the fire torches they held. Due to the banquet, many of the patrol guards became very frugal and used few water moonstones for illumination. While they didn't believe one banquet was enough to bankrupt their tribe, they privately felt like they should be frugal now anyways. That was why everyone seemed to suddenly become more frugal in lifestyle since they started preparations for the banquet. Within the tribe, they would not use water moonstones if fire torches were available. Even after the feast ended, they still did not change their habits immediately. That was why we now asked them about it. Even they didn't know if water moonstones could attract insects because they had been using fire torches. The entire area darkened without a single fire lit. Against the darkness, the water moonstones became very obvious. While they were all dim, when concentrated together, their total brightness had obviously increased many folds. Though they couldn't be compared to good quality stones, their numbers contributed greatly. After backing away, Shashwan suppressed his aura to erase his existence as much as possible. Everyone else had been briefed by Al, so they knew what to do. When Shashwan and Dao dimmed their auras, they followed suit but also stared curiously at the water moonstones. What were the dim water moonstones for? Were they baiting the insects? It was very quiet. They heard faint sounds from the tribe on the hill, as well as insects from the forest, but they did not pay attention to these sounds. Shashwan focused on distinguishing the various sounds around. Within the fields, water was flowing across the irrigation canals dug by the tribesmen. The night breeze blew, causing friction between the crop leaves and producing a rustling. Shashwan cocked his head, listening to a sound from a particular direction. It came from the field. Suo, tiny, abrupt leaping sounds could be heard heading in his direction. In the sky, sounds of insect wings beating fast could be heard approaching. These were the nocturnal flying insects. A slender figure appeared at the water moonstone pile, the black silhouette obvious against the glowing stones. "It works." Shashwan was delighted. When they saw the figure, the warriors in charge of guarding the fields all raised their eyebrows. Although it couldn't be seen fully, they still recognized it based on its shape. This was one of the most annoying insects in the field. They stayed underground during the day and only came out at night. It was too difficult to guard the crops against these insects unless they could add underground barriers around them too. Plus, these bugs weren't afraid of the herbs they burned meant as insect repellent, nor could they be smoked out. Everyone gritted their teeth whenever they saw the tiny holes bitten by these bugs in the mornings. They couldn't believe that the dully glowing water moonstones could attract the irritating insects. A few nocturnal flying insects arrived the moment this one arrived, and their numbers were increasing. Very soon, probably because they realized there were no threats around, all the other insects hiding in the trees, among the grass and in the fields also flew over as if something was attracting them over. More and more silhouettes could be seen against the water moonstones. Big, small, long, short, winged, wingless, jumping, flying insects all started to congregate around. Some even started to fight among themselves for a spot in the light. When the water moonstone pile was almost completely covered by bugs, and the sky was filled with the sound of flapping insect wings, Shashwan commanded in a low voice, "Now!" In a moment, the people with the nets pounced to catch the concentrated swarm of insects in their nets, then slamming it into the ground. Slam! The insects in the nets were flattened on the ground. The bugs on the ground were consecutively hit with the giant fly swatter. At this moment, the nearer an insect was to the stone pile, the harder it was for it to escape the swats. When everything ended, Shashwan used a wooden stick to prod all the various insects under the water moonstone light. Some of the insects on the ground weren't flattened but had lost their mobility. Shashwan was about to embark on an expedition along the flaming river downstream, so they were likely going to meet the same kinds of insects. He wanted to check out the types of insects he might encounter. Shashwan picked some of the bugs out and put them in a cloth bag. He chose only the ones with intact bodies. A portion of these insects were rarely seen. Some looked aggressive with venomous stingers or pincers, plus they camouflaged well with their surroundings. If they didn't catch these insects now, they might not even notice these insects during the day. He had to show his expedition team these specimens so they would be mentally prepared. Ao instructed the rest to clean up the area and sweep up the dead insects into a pile. They'd asked the farmers if these could be turned into fertilizer when they arrived. "What do you think?" Ao looked delighted when he came over to talk to Shashwan. How could he not be happy? Now he knew that these basically useless water moonstones could be used to attract insects. Although it did not completely solve his problem, at least he could alleviate it. Any help was good. "It's alright, but the effects are limited. The bugs we caught might not be the ones eating the crops," said Shashwan. "Plus, the stones might not work well on cloudless nights. The good quality moonstones would still be better." "Of course I'm aware of that, but a majority of the bugs we caught were crop-eating pests. As for the moonlight, based on the weather, these few nights should be cloudy. Even if the clouds only cover the moon for a while, it'll be enough." I was prepared for this. He did not have high expectations for its effectiveness. At least they were effective. It was better than wasting the water moonstones. "Then should we get more of these stones from the drumming tribe tomorrow?" asked Ao. "Sure." This could be counted as a nighttime insect trap. On the next day, they crossed the river to meet the drumming chief. When he knew that Flaming Horn wanted their rejects, the drumming chief dragged out several sacks without a word. When Ao wanted to pay them, Fan Mu stubbornly declined any payment. To the drumming tribe, these were useless. It was a waste to leave them in the store anyway, and they wouldn't be able to sell them for much money. Might as well give them all to Ao. However, Ao did not take them all. He took 2/3 away and left 1/3 for the drumming tribe. With Shashwan's consent, he also told the drumming tribe about last night's incident. The drumming tribe was currently facing a food shortage. Although they didn't really like insects, there were still several kinds of insects from the forest around the river banks that tasted decent. Plus these insects had already started to cross the river. It was just that the drumming tribe lived in close proximity to their fire seed, hence the insects never flew close. "That's very interesting." Fan Mu found this idea to be very unique. They had possessed water moonstones for such a long time, yet never noticed this phenomenon. "You all can experiment with a few stones too. You might even catch some bugs," suggested Ao. "Thank you for telling us." The drumming tribe was very grateful that Flaming Horn was actually willing to share knowledge and experience with them. That night, their patrol team tested this theory and indeed caught some. The patrol team roasted these insects for supper. On Flaming Horn's side, the initially deemed useless water moonstones were distributed. At night, when the moons were covered by clouds, they soon heard the sound of flapping wings. "Hey, be gentle. I don't want everything to become fertilizer. We might be able to eat any bigger or intact bugs," yelled one of the people waving the nets. "I know," answered the guy with the giant fly swatter. After a round of swatting, they cleaned the ground and picked out bigger and intact insects. They ate the edible ones. Everything else was left aside to be made into fertilizer. As for insects they didn't recognize, they were more cautious. The matter of eating insects was nothing to the Flaming Horns. This happened at a few spots around the field that night. That was why for a long time after this night, there was one more thing for crop field guards to do during their night shift: getting their supper from the water moonstones. Chapter 631, New Changes. The crop field guards would pick some of the caught insects and put them aside for Shashwan to study when he was free. When he saw any new, foreign insects, he would pick them out. After a life of living in the forest, They could guess which of these insects were potentially threatening to humans based on their physical characteristics. It was good preparation to know more insects before their trip. They prepared insect-repelling herbs and mud too. When they leave, it would be after the monsoon when temperatures would soar. They would be wearing sleeveless clothing then, some of them topless. They'd need the colored mud and insect repellent then. It would help with camouflage and repelling insects. The monsoon season would arrive at full moon. Judging by the moons in the sky, the monsoon was near. Before the monsoon arrived, the Longboat Tribe arrived again. This time, they weren't heading for the trading point but were here to give the Flaming Horns boats. Before they left the Flaming River trading point, both tribes had negotiated once and the Longboat Tribe had agreed to gift them 2 boats. Due to the change in weather last year, many of the Longboat Tribe's boats had been destroyed. They did not have enough for themselves, and could build a limited number this year. They could only afford to gift Flaming Horn 2 for now. They would have to wait if they wanted more because it took time to build boats. The Longboat tribesmen were strict in their craft, so they spent a lot of time and effort on each boat. The boats they gifted Flaming Horn were about the same as their own fleet, though there were masts added. But that was not the only difference. There had been a lot of advancement in their craft this year. There were troughs added inside the boats. Shashwan had seen them. The rooms inside the boats were leak-proof, so in the event of hull damage, the boat would still be able to operate despite water seeping into 1 or 2 cabins. The boats were now more sink-resistant. This was why Shashwan was so impressed by the Longboat Tribe. They truly were masters of boat building. Perhaps the disaster had encouraged the Longboat tribesmen to innovate and build leak-resistant cabins, or perhaps they already had this idea for a long time. No one knew. Even without this, their boats were always sturdier even if other people were given the same materials to build the same boat. Shashwan could not determine how many secrets were hidden in this craft. The Longboat Tribe truly lived up to their names, for their mastery of the art far exceeded other tribes. This time, the Longboat Tribe's gifts were given with utmost sincerity. It was a lot better than the boats they gave Flaming Horn due to the incident with the green-faced fanged beasts at Fearsome Beast Forest. Those boats might have looked almost the same, if one were to actually put them to use. It was incomparable to these current boats. If both boats collided, the previous batch would definitely be destroyed first. When they saw that the Flaming Horns were satisfied with the boats, the people who brought the boats over secretly heaved a sigh of relief. For some reason, although they were always arrogant when interacting with other tribes, they became much more timid around the Flaming Horns, especially when they met Shashwan. They were always worried he might shoot fire if he got upset. After Flaming Horn inspected and accepted the boats, the Longboat tribesmen went to trade at the trading point once more. To them, there were many coveted items at the trading points, other than beast flesh and hide. Fish skin, glue and wood were also attractive goods. The wood that Flaming Horn helped them procure previously were all kept in the storage. They planned to take some back. They had been hungry for sturdy, ancient wood from the Fearsome Beast Forest for a long time. 2 days after they delivered the boats, monsoon began. Consecutive days of rain caused activity at the trading point to quiet down. The busy folk finally had time to rest. Zhengluo passed all the information he collected at the trading point to Shashwan. They had discovered 3 more tribes in the Flaming River area, though they were further away from Flaming Horn. They only know of the approximate location, just not the exact points. I've mentioned one of the tribes to you before. That one is almost the same as the Longboat Tribe, which already disappeared after the disaster. They brought a lot of fishing nets, so they must be a tribe that catches fish for a living. But they were way luckier than the Longboat Tribe to be able to survive the disaster unscathed. And the other tribe, Zhengluo told everything he knew to Shashwan, who recorded them on an animal skin scroll. He would confirm these notes during his expedition down the river. After receiving the information, Shashwan returned to the main village and descended the hill to talk to Guihe about the finalized candidates. They had mostly confirmed the 200 names, it just required some finalization. On top of the hill, Shashwan saw that the 2 former shamans who are now elders of the tribe seemed to be arguing about something. Ever since Guihe took over as the new shamaness, The two elders did not need to live in the shaman's quarters anymore. They built 2 more houses here for convenience whenever they had to discuss matters. Unfortunately, their conversations often ended in argument. When Shashwan went over, the 2 elders were in such a heated argument they almost fought each other with their walking canes. "What's the matter?" asked Shashwan. "Ah, Juan, it's great you're here. Come take a look at what I drew." The old man dragged Shashwan into his house. Shashwan looked at what the old man pointed to. There was a thin stone slab. On the stone slab was a mess of color pigments. What was he supposed to be looking at? Sensing Shashwan's confusion, the old man realized the problem. "Oh, not that. That's something I drew last time. Look at this one." The old man pointed at a wide leaf on the table. There was a much clearer drawing on the leaf drawn with bright red pigment. Shashwan was stunned to see the drawing. The old man often drew observational drawings, that is of people he recently met or things he saw, or an important event, etc. Shashwan thought he'd draw something with a story. The drawing on the leaf was a scene from the grand banquet at the Flaming River trading point. Although it was a simple drawing, Shashwan could recognize it based on the outlines. That was because many people had talked to him about it and drawn it for him before this. "This is the ancestors' flame giant?" Shashwan was puzzled, not understanding what the old man meant. They were both in such a heated argument over the ancestors' flame giant. "Yep." The old man was very emotional. He picked the leaf up carefully and pointed at the drawing. "What do you think of it?" "It's a simple and clear drawing, captures the sanctity of the ancestors," said Shashwan. "I'm not asking your opinion on the drawing, I'm asking you, what do you think after seeing the ancestors in this form?" asked the old man. What did he think? He only knew that his ancestors took the form of a blurry flame giant. What opinions could he have about it? Shashwan did not catch his point. "Don't you think our ancestors look exceptionally great in this form?" asked the old man hopefully. "Exceptionally great? Which part?" Shashwan was still confused. It was rare to hear a flaming horn compliment something to look exceptionally great. In the end, the old lady standing next to them had to explain. "He wants to design new ceremony clothing based on the ancestors' flame giant form." "New ceremony clothing?" Shashwan was shocked and looked at the drawing once again. With fresh eyes, he did feel a windswept, breezy pride from the drawing. But didn't the flaming horns despise clothing styles like that? Didn't they all think that clothing like that was useless during a hunt? Hence it was ugly as hell. After spending so many years here, Shashwan's sense of aesthetic had been affected too. But after understanding the old man's intentions, Shashwan did think that it was beautiful. He also thought it was a hint from the ancestors that it was time to change their ceremony attire. It wasn't going to be a big problem though. To the flaming horns, their ancestors were always good. Even if they didn't like this style before, if it was created by their ancestors, they would attempt to embrace it. The old man wanted to change the flaming horn ceremony attire, but the old lady disagreed, not because she didn't like the ancestors' style. Similarly, she thought it looked good. However, she didn't think everyone should wear this attire. Their founder was the first shaman, so this clothing style should be reserved for the shamans. Shashwan thought about this style involving billowing fabric, then thought about the usual tribesman attire involving horns and fangs worn around the neck, a green, wide blade in hand, white beast claw shoes and colorful snakeskin belts. It was a jarring comparison. "You two, carry on with your discussion." Many changes here were not due to Shashwan's deliberate planning. In this world, changes occurred after various events. Chapter 632, Downstream Travels. This year's monsoon did not last long, ending after just barely 20 days. When the skies cleared, temperatures rose rapidly. It was now the hottest time of the year. At this time, the 2 moons had gradually grown into full moons. Fire torches were no longer needed at night for a clear view. After watching the 1,000-grain gold passing their second blocks, he finally brought his party on the boats to embark on their expedition. The Flaming River's water levels rose a little after the monsoon. Due to mud and silt, the river was a murky yellow now. Taking a look at the flowing river, Shashwan bade his tribesmen farewell and set off with the 200 people he chose. There were 2 boats, 100 people on each. Shashwan's boat traveled in front. In fact, the Longboat Tribe's gift boats were gigantic and were definitely enough for 200 people. Forget about 200, even 500 would be fine. However, they brought with them stocks that took up some space. Plus, if there was some accident to one boat, they could return on the other. 2 boats bearing the flaming horn totem left the tribe with billowing sails bringing them downstream. They definitely weren't going to bring any fearsome beasts on this trip, though Copw was an exception. Too bad it could fly, plus it wouldn't stay at Flaming Horn without Shashwan there. That was why he made Copw follow him on this expedition. Copw could help with surveillance from afar, since their field of vision was limited on the boat. Half a day later, Shashwan kept monoculars to instruct his crew to approach the banks and plant their signs. After the Flaming River was named, they only planted signs bearing the name Flaming River within a limited radius. The ones in charge of planting signs were operating within a limited distance anyway. They mostly relied on word of mouth by the tribes around Flaming River to spread the word. Now, since their team was traveling further downstream, they took the opportunity to plant signs. From here on, Shashwan instructed his crew to plant signs at every interval. When the people in charge of the signs were busy on the bank, there would also be guards to prevent ambushes. This was not a region they were familiar with, so they must remain vigilant. Shashwan got Copw to bring him up in the air and circle the area. After they landed, he took out a scroll, dipped an animal fur brush in color pigment, then drew. He was updating his maps. Since his tribe will be living here for a long time, they must be familiar with both sides of the river. It was simple on the side with the fearsome beast forest. The topography was generally the same, nor were there people living there. If there were others, the Flaming Horn ancestors who were blocked off from the world by the river would have discovered them already. They wouldn't have missed another tribe for 1,000 years. Shashwan mainly focused on studying the other side. After last year's disaster, both sides of the river underwent different changes. One side sunk while the other protruded upwards. This caused one side to be elevated than the other. Shashwan and the rest could only study the less elevated side when they were on their boats. The lower regions were coincidentally the site they most needed to observe anyway. Farther away from the fearsome beast forest, most of the tribes were located on this side. Their boats also tended to travel this way. After planting the signs, everyone rested for a while and set off again. Every day, the routine was similar. Sometimes, they would encounter beasts drinking water on the river banks, but they couldn't swim, so all they did was roar irritably at Shashwan and the rest. In the future, would more fearsome beasts that know how to swim cross over to the other side? Said Duoli. Probably not. Chio did not think so. The forest fearsome beasts know what habitats suit themselves most. They might cross over due to an accident, but in the end still return to their original habitat in the forest. Chio deduced based on his vast hunting experience and knowledge of animal habits. So that's why I haven't seen any fearsome beasts cross the river. Duoli nodded. There are other reasons. Shashwan kept his animal skin scroll and said, in the memory of many fearsome beasts, this side is dangerous. Plus this side must have been hit hard after last year's disasters. The beasts that lived near the river all ran far away. Just like the nocturnal swallows that used to live around our tribe, they've disappeared. They left to escape the disaster and then found a new place to live. That is why there shouldn't be too many fearsome beasts crossing this river in the near future. After a pause, Shashwan continued. Then again, there are tribes on the other side of the river. Although they are not very close to each other, their presence will still affect the beasts. It's because of the fire seeds in the tribes. When Shashwan mentioned the fire seed, Duoli, Chio and the rest remembered. The Flaming Horns often forgot to take fire seeds into account because theirs no longer existed in the primitive form. But to most of the tribes here, the primitive fire seeds still existed. Even the fire seeds of small tribes had massive effects on forest beasts. Nothing new happened the next few days. The topography of both sides of the river was similar. Shashwan continued updating his maps. He could sense if there were tribes in the area. Due to the distance from the river banks, he could not sense the human auras, but he could sense the fire seeds. They were very faint, plus some tribes even deliberately hid their fire seed zoras. The shamans of many tribes might not even be able to identify these fire seed zoras, but Shashwan could. Due to time constraints, it was impossible for him to scout out each tribe. However, as long as he sensed the fire seed, he could gauge their general characteristics. This was a newfound ability he discovered he had. A few years ago, when he wanted to know what a tribe's fire seed was like, he must be close to their tribe. It was just like how he only sensed the drumming fire seed when he just crossed the river years ago. Now, he could sense them without going too close. Sometimes, he could only sense a faint trace if the tribe was too far away. 10 days later, Shashwan had already made 7 dots on the map. 4 dots had totems drawn next to them, while the other 3 did not. The dots represented a tribe living in the area. Upon closer inspection, one would notice that the locations of the dots with totems were closer to the river banks. The rest without totems were farther away. It was also impossible for Shashwan to pinpoint their exact location. He just had a general sense of where they were. This map would just be a rough reference. At least the Flaming Horns had an estimate of the number of tribes in the area around Flaming River. In the future, when the number of people at Flaming River Trading Point increased, they'd receive more information and get to update their maps. They had to take baby steps first. If we travel further, we should meet that Gu tribe, right? Asked Duoli. Yeah, that's based on what Shengluo told me. Shashwan looked at the notes on what Shengluo told him about the Gu tribe. It was the furthest from Flaming Horn, so Shashwan remembered it. The Gu tribe was the one Shengluo mentioned, the tribe that traded fishing nets at the Flaming River Trading Point. Apparently they also lived by the Flaming River and were luckier than the Luo tribe that disappeared after the disaster. They did not suffer major losses. Therefore, he deduced that they weren't very close to the river banks. Shashwan straightened himself. If he couldn't focus his mind, he might not be able to sense a tribe farther from the banks. If the Gu tribe specialized in making fishing nets, they must catch fish often. However, before the disaster, this river wasn't a good place to fish. They might have been fishing in another river farther from this one. Shashwan instructed Chaka in the air to take note of other inland streams in the area, and to alert him if he saw any human activity. Another day passed, but Shashwan still hadn't sensed the presence of another tribe's fire seed. Chaka, who had been given a massive responsibility, also did not see any signs of human activity. Worse, other than the Flaming River, he didn't see any other rivers. There were no lakes either, just narrow mountain spring brooks at most. Perhaps due to the lack of rivers, regions far from the Flaming River did not have dense vegetations. The rolling hills were simply plain. Both sides of the river had great differences. On one side was the land of beasts and lush vegetations. When one looked out from an elevated place, this entire area was green and ancient skyscraper trees could be seen. On this side, the grasses merely resembled short fur. Without a water source, the lands in this area might not be suitable for agriculture either. And without dense trees, there might not be many beasts. Then the possibility of finding a tribe here would be low. Is that Gu tribe really here? Could they have lied to us? Asked Duoli. Not just Duoli. Other people thought so too. Not every person who went to the trading point always told the truth. Some of them only mentioned general locations. One might not be able to find them when visiting the actual place. Just like the Z tribe, everyone knew which piece of land they were on, but very few could find their nest. Some tribes told complete lies, even pointing in the wrong direction. Perhaps we've passed the Gu tribe already, said Chio. Shashwan looked at the map. He hadn't been able to sense the totem characteristics of 3 tribes. Perhaps the Gu tribe was one of them. That's possible too. Shashwan nodded in agreement of Chio's deduction, but thought for a while and took out the fishing nets the Gu tribe had brought to the trading point. The Gu tribe had brought these nets out for trade. They'd been kept by Zhengluo, and afterwards Shashwan brought 2 Gu nets out for his expedition. If they couldn't hunt any beasts, they would be able to catch fish. The Gu tribe's net was different from the Luo tribe. The Luo tribe's net had finer mesh, while the Gu tribe had both kinds of nets. Their weaving patterns were very different from Luo, and there could be different weaving patterns on just one net. After looking at the nets, Shashwan turned to Duo Li, who was fishing using a fishing rod, and said, "Get Kuntu here, I need to ask him something." Duo Li grunted, kept his fishing rod and rushed into the cabin looking for Kuntu. Shashwan had picked almost 100 guards from the trading point to come with him on this trip. They took up half the expedition team. The guards who were often on duty at the trading point would have met many tribes and had some impression of foreign tribes people. Kuntu was the guard stationed at the trading point's entrance, one of the people who had direct contact with the Gu tribe. Chapter 633, A Different Net. Kuntu, who was resting in the cabin, arrived quickly. "Grand Elder, you were looking for me?" asked Kuntu. Different from people who had grown up with Shashwan like Chuo and Ogwang, he was one of the people who had returned to the tribe with the Flaming Horn Wanderers on the grasslands. Due to his outstanding performance and great improvement in his capabilities, he was now actively involved in the tribe. Before joining this expedition team, Kuntu often guarded the Flaming River trading point's entrance and came into contact with many foreign tribes. Kuntu had always been respectful of Shashwan. Shashwan was one of the people who greeted them at the grasslands. Without that, even if Flaming Horn's fire seed was relit at the old haunt, they still wouldn't have been able to leave the plains. After various incidents and Shashwan's current status in the tribe, Kuntu would not address him as casually as others. That was why he still called Shashwan Grand Elder. Shashwan beckoned him over. "Come take a look at this. These are the nets the Gu tribesmen brought to the trading point, right?" Kuntu went over, then squatted to study the nets next to Shashwan. More than one tribe traded fishing nets at the trading point and many fishing nets looked similar, so he had to study them carefully despite already recognizing that it was the Gu tribes with one look. He did not want to lose face in front of the Grand Elder. After thorough examination of both nets, Kuntan nodded in confirmation. "Yes, both are from the Gu tribe. Their nets are different from other tribes and the netting patterns are different too. There are many parts of the nets I don't understand, but the Gu tribesmen didn't elaborate at the time." It was true that the Gu's nets were quite different from other nets. There were even parts that made you feel like they'd made a mistake in the weaving. "They didn't explain?" Shashwan asked, looking at a few places that looked like redundant, repetitive weaving. "Yeah, I was curious too and asked them about it. They didn't explain, merely saying that they made their nets like that." But Kuntu hesitated but continued, "I think there are other secrets behind this." The few from the Gu tribe did not give me friendly looks. "What do you mean?" Duoli and Chio were curious. "I'm not sure if I got it right, but they looked at me as if I was the uncultured one, unable to identify a good thing in front of me." Kuntu scratched his head. He was a wanderer who lived in the plains without the protection of any tribe. With a life of relying on other tribes, they learned how to read people well. Kuntu was one of the more talented leaders from the Flaming Horn Wanderers and had sharper senses in many areas. That was also why Shashwan called him over. While the Gu tribesmen did not display any obvious emotion and restrained themselves quickly, he still caught the "you uncultured swine" derogatory look. Very few people would give hostile looks to Flaming Horns at the trading point. While they were not used to each other, it was rare for anyone to act hostile. "Tell me about it." Shashwan was interested now. It took studying many details to paint the big picture. Subsequently, getting to know a tribe, studying the way they use their tools was one of the methods. During that period of time, most of the visitors to the trading point were smaller tribes around the Flaming River region. That was also why most of them were uncomfortable and worried with the Flaming Horn's display of power. However, Zhengluo's comments and Kuntu's observations showed that the Gu tribesmen did not feel this way at all. Although the Gu tribesmen at the trading point were also curious and surprised at the goods displayed there, compared to the other tribes, they had an undertone of pride too. Shashwan was no stranger to this trait. Tribesmen like that usually came from areas with geographical features to the tribe's advantage. They were no underdogs. This means the Gu tribe definitely isn't a small group like the Zit tribe. Shashwan picked the net up, then got Duoli, Chio and Kuntu to open the net. Shashwan lifted a wooden log over. It had been left to dry in the sun on the deck, meant to be chopped for firewood. Shashwan lifted the tree as thick as a human effortlessly with one hand. He looked at the 10-meter-long net that took 3 people to spread. If it were to be spread completely, it should be almost 30 meters long. Zheng Luo had received these 2 nets recently before Shashwan left. Zheng Luo hadn't had time to study it due to his work, so Shashwan decided to test it today. He scanned the whole net, then the log he held. He carved a few holes at the head of the log using a knife, then plugged a few tree branches inside like deer antlers. Then, Shashwan grabbed the log with antlers and approached the net. When he approached, he couldn't see much, but once the log touched the net and was dragged forward, the regular-looking net made a SSSS sound. As if a switch had been activated, changes occurred on the nets. All 3 people who helped lift the net and several other people around all stared at the net intently. This net that initially looked like one piece suddenly acted like 2 pieces. One maintained its original shape to stop the prey, while another net started to contract in the direction of the part where the prey hit. Since Shashwan wasn't moving fast and prodded the net very slowly, everyone could clearly observe the entire process. There are 2 nets? Isn't this a net to catch fish? What is this? Everyone was shocked. When Shashwan continued pushing the log into the net, the second netting layer finally finished its contraction. The second net was already tied tightly on the log. The first layer acted like a drawstring pouch, trapping the prey inside. This second net had a drawing mechanism, so it trapped the prey in the drawstring pouch. A net like that and pseudo poles on the side, hidden along a path where the prey will pass through. Once the prey hits the net, or was chased into it by the hunters, it would be trapped inside. If it were a deer with long antlers, its antlers would be knotted tightly inside. Its neck would probably be trapped too, so the net tightens as it struggles, finally strangling it to death, said Shashwan. Due to some research on knots, Shashwan understood the netting system better than the rest. The tribesmen understood this too, so they did not doubt his words. This net is used to catch prey with physiques like deers and goats, Shashwan concluded. They didn't know what plant was used to make this net, but it had been delicately processed so they'd be extra sturdy. It was more than enough to catch regular beasts. Then it's not a fishing net. Duo Li was shocked. This means that the Gu tribe might not be living near the Flaming River. It might not even be near the river. They could be further inland? Wondered Chio aloud. No, they must be in the area. They won't be too far from the Flaming River, said Shashwan confidently. As he spoke, Shashwan picked the other net up. This was different from the first net, using a different weaving style and straw rope. The first net was woven from straw rope braided using tight threads. It was very sturdy. No spaces could be found between the threads. Even a thorn would not be able to pierce through the roll unless a lot of force was applied. However, the second net was woven from a different rope. It was just a thin thread-like plant combined but not braided together. After instructing Duo Li and the rest to lift the second net up, Shashwan did not use the log. Instead, he went to the place where they threw food scraps. There were some piranha bones from when they fished and roasted before. The piranha's scallions and rows of sharp teeth were easily recognized. Shashwan took one of the skeletal heads. The opened jaw revealed many sharp teeth. He clamped the jaw full of teeth on the net, then moved it as if it was trying to bite the net. This fish would have definitely left teeth marks on regular fishing nets. Less sturdy ones would quickly break. However, even after tens of bites, the net remained almost perfect. The threads woven into the net would split when the piranha bit down, causing the threads to slip in between the teeth. That was why every bite would just pass through the rope. Then when the fish released it, the threads would shrink back together into a rope. This is a net specifically for catching piranhas? Duo Li lifted the net curiously to study it, even testing it out with a piranha skeleton. It works. Most inland rivers also had fish with sharp teeth, though not as many as this river and were of different species. They would not weave a specialized net like that to catch these fish. If they made a net like that, it was likely to catch piranhas from Flaming River, as piranhas lived in large schools here. The Gu tribe is definitely awesome at making nets. Although he hadn't met them, Chio had to admit this fact. And if Shashwan hadn't pointed it out, they wouldn't have noticed so soon. And if this net is wet, the threads would be even more slippery, the fish teeth would pass through easily and the net won't be broken in a short period of time. Shashwan touched the wet part of the net, passing it to everyone. I can't believe it. Kuntu scratched his head again. So that was why the few Gu tribe members looked at him that way. He really wasn't knowledgeable enough to recognize the wonders of this net. With net weaving skills like that, the Gu tribesmen definitely won't go hungry. On the contrary, they must be quite rich, said Shashwan. But there is no Gu tribe here. We've traveled along the river but did not see them, or you would have known already. Kuntu still couldn't understand why. If we haven't seen them, then the Gu tribe must be farther than we thought. Shashwan stared out ahead. The Gu tribe knew about the trading point despite the fact that they were located so far away. They must have had very efficient information sources. Chapter 634, Net Pattern Pottery. The crew grew more alert after the revelation about the Gu tribe. If the Gu tribe wasn't a very powerful and aggressive tribe, it would be fine. Minor squabbles wouldn't affect Flaming Horn either. However, if they were very aggressive people, then Flaming Horn must stay guarded. Of course, Shaoxan didn't think the Gu tribe was a group of people who liked to invade and rob other tribes for a living. If they were specialized in robbery, why would they spend so much time perfecting their craft? Also, that would mean they kept a high profile, though why hadn't any of the tribes in the area heard of them? Even when Flaming Horn's expedition team visited the major trading points in different parts of the mainland, they still hadn't heard of this tribe's name. Various expedition teams never mentioned them. Even the Pu tribe didn't know of the Gu tribe's existence. This meant that the Gu tribe's most likely situation was far from everyone, in a secluded place, somewhere low-key around the Flaming River region. This analysis calmed Shashwan down. Vegetation along the banks grew denser down the river. It was difficult to determine if any tribes lived in this area. After flying in the air with Chaka for a while, he returned to his boat to update the map. There wasn't anything important. Only the river and hills were particularly noteworthy, but the number of hills was falling. Yet, he encountered more water bodies here. In the air, he saw lakes and rivers, as well as more animals in the forest. They could hear a cacophony of animal sounds far and near, shrill and deep, within the forest. Shashwan was updating his map in his cabin when he heard commotion outside. Duoli and the rest must have caught some fish again, some fish they hadn't seen before, or it wouldn't have caused commotion like that. This happened more frequently the further they traveled downstream, the more diverse the aquatic animals were. When Shashwan went out to take a look, he saw Ogwang holding a long, peculiar fish as thick as his arm. This weird fish was covered in mud yellow and black pattern. If it rested along the banks, it would be difficult to spot. It had a sucker-like mouth and a very slippery body. Ogwang could only pin it under his arm at the portion behind its head, causing it to struggle and twist vigorously. There were countless hook-like teeth in its sucker-like mouth that were lined in a ring-like shape. However, they did not touch Ogwang. They were only useful at a certain angle of 90 degrees. Duoli stuck a wooden stick into its round mouth, only to hear gnawing sounds and then realized that the stick had turned into wooden chips. The weird fish also had two pectoral fins like huge fans large enough to cover a human face. When Ogwang pinned them down under his arm, the fish looked longer and more slender than it usually did. After playing a bit with the fish, they then cleaned it and thought about roasting it for food. It's got a hook in its stomach. Chuo, who was in charge of cleaning the fish, took out the hook from its stomach. After washing the blood away, the shape of the hook became more obvious. Chuo passed it to Shashwan. It's man-made. It was a stone fishing hook as long as the little finger, with a hook at the end. It had been sanded so it was very sharp. The fish could chew wood up to pieces but not sturdy rock. That was why the hook was unscathed in its stomach. Maybe there are tribes nearby, or it swam here from somewhere else? Deduced Chuo, looking at the forest on both sides of the river. The crew thought the former was more likely, so both boats grew more alert. Shashwan did not sense any fire sea doras. Even if there was a tribe here, they weren't close. Half a day passed. When they stopped by the banks to plant a sign and rest, the ones who entered the forest to hunt discovered a broken clay jar half buried in soil. The jar was small but its craftsmanship was exquisite. It was colored too, but Shashwan cared more about the patterns. There was an extremely delicate, deep-colored netting pattern etched on the surface of this jar as big as a palm. The artist who made this must have been very dedicated to his work. While a netting pattern wasn't complicated, it was difficult to draw it accurately on the curved surface of the jar. One mistake would ruin the whole pattern. Hence it wasn't simple. Hundreds of lines were drawn very close to each other on the outer surface of this clay jar, all equal and smooth. It seemed as if a ruler had been used during the drawing process, so the space between these lines were all equal and unbroken. The artist must have been very experienced. Other than the thin, crossing lines, there were also thicker curved lines near the bottle's mouth and underneath the bottle. 2/3 down the bottle, there were also thick curved lines. Underneath was the tightly drawn net pattern. This formed an obvious contrast between the thick and thin lines, creating an impressive visual effect. Making pottery required passion too. The person in charge of pottery at Flaming Horn was crossing. He gained more wisdom the more he worked on his pottery. The old man once said that pottery made from passion will always be different from one made without. Although the jar was broken, after washing off the layer of mud, the delicate hand-drawn lines were still obvious. This was enough to create a striking impact, or the Flaming Horns who were looking for food wouldn't have discovered it. There was even grass around, plus it had been half buried in the soil. Only part of it peeked out from among the grass, but they still saw it in an instant. It was obvious that this jar was not made out of a whim. Its creator had injected enough passion and patience into its making this jar as big as a palm. Its previous contents must have been very important. Any totems on it? Asked Chio. Shashwan shook his head. Not sure. Perhaps it's on here but we can't see it, or the broken part was the part with the totem, or they didn't draw their totem on. The second and third deductions are more likely. If the person who made it was so detail-oriented, he would be even more careful in pouring his passion into drawing the totem. If there was a totem, even if Shashwan hadn't seen it before, he would have definitely found it already. I wonder which tribe made this. Could it be the Gu tribe? Asked Duoli. Shashwan mulled over the thought as he stared at the jar in his hand. He had the same idea as Duoli. Different tribes preferred different patterns due to varying lifestyles. That is, some liked cloud patterns, some liked animal print. The pattern on this jar was in the net pattern category. It was obvious that the tribe liked net-like patterns. It was likely to be the Gu tribe. They did not throw the jar away. Instead, Shashwan brought it on the boat and told them to search around the area to see if they found anything else. More clues would lead to a better understanding of the jar's origins. Chapter 635, Strange Fish. After they found the netting-patterned jar, they continued to travel downstream. Shashwan could sense another tribe around, but they were slightly farther away from the Flaming River, so he couldn't distinguish what kind of tribe it was. The only thing he could confirm was that these tribes were not strong, or the aura from their fire seed would have been easily sensed. When they were planting the signs, they also noticed some traces of human activities. They deduced that people rarely came by the river because although there were traces, they were not new. They also noticed that other than the net pattern pots and tools they found earlier, there were also others with different designs. After sensing the fire seed, Shashwan marked out its approximate location on his map. Should we go take a look over there? Duoli asked Shashwan. If they could travel upstream and locate the position of the fire seed, then they would be able to identify the characteristics of that tribe. There's no need. Shashwan rolled up his map. We don't need to care too much about that. Heading in that direction would waste a lot of time. The Flaming River is long, and we're not even sure if we can finish exploring the area within the scheduled time. Let's not pay too much attention to the smaller tribes for now. Looking ahead at the Flaming River, Shashwan said, I feel like there's going to be a slightly bigger tribe in front. It was rare to hear Shashwan say slightly bigger. Most tribes along the Flaming River were smaller tribes with fewer people. Some of these tribes did not even have more than a few hundred in total. These were tragically low numbers. Duoli and the others couldn't understand how they even survived. When they heard Shashwan say a slightly bigger tribe, all of them looked surprised. Finally, A larger tribe. If the tribes around the Flaming River region consisted of only tribes with a few hundred people each, they wouldn't bring much trouble to the Flaming Horns. Even if they joined forces against them, they would still be too weak to fight the small group of Flaming Horns from the central region. Did you all notice the river widening the more we traveled downstream? Shashwan asked. Yeah, they wouldn't have noticed if Shashwan didn't mention it. But the two shorelines did seem farther apart. They had been traveling along the side of the river opposite the territory of the fierce beasts. Now, when they looked at the forests on the other side, everything appeared smaller. It was just like Shashwan said. The river widened as they traveled downstream. Shashwan roughly estimated that the distance between the two shorelines was already more than 1,000 meters at their current location. The variety of fish also became more diverse as they traveled. There were not only piranhas like before, but also other types of fish. But the good thing was that the boats continued to travel normally in the river. There were no wood-eating bugs or giant beasts in the river. No, to be more specific, there were no longer river beasts that lived in the river like before when the Great River still existed. However, whether there were fierce beasts that entered the river, they were not sure. A wider river meant a larger habitat. Perhaps a few fierce beasts that liked water had already come out from the forest and entered the river. Stay alert. Keep a close watch on everything happening in the waters. We'll continue to travel along the shore, Shashwan said. Usually, there were fewer aquatic beasts near the river shores. They usually settled in the middle of the river where the water was deeper. Shashwan and the others still could not tell whether there were any beasts in the river. It was always good to stay more vigilant. The closer they were to the shore, the easier it was for them to escape if anything happened. Where's Chaka? Shashwan looked around in the sky. He did not see Chaka's figure. Probably went hunting for food? Chio said. Shashwan did not care. He had been like this for a while now. Every time after he brought Shashwan up into the skies to scan the grounds below, Chaka would fly far away to play or look for clues farther ahead. Sometimes he even went to the territory of the fearsome beasts to search for prey. Somewhere downstream from where Shashwan and the others were, in the center of the river, a wooden raft was shaking violently. Atop the wooden raft, a frightened young man held onto it tightly. He still had some hope if he stayed on the raft, but if he fell into the river, that would be the end for him. The reason why the raft was shaking so violently was that something was shaking it from underneath. In the river, on the shorelines, a few young men shouted. Even if they wanted to help, they could not do anything. If they jumped into the waters now, they would die. If the fish swallowed them in the river, they would also lose their lives. Shoot arrows? There's no use. That fish was too cunning and wouldn't give them a chance to shoot. It either hid in the waters or behind the raft. If they shot arrows, they might even end up hurting the person on the raft. So they had to be careful if they fired. Hang on, big brother. We're already calling people over. A child about the age of 10 shouted from the shores. Use the oar to hit it. No, don't listen to him. You'll just anger it if you hit it with the oar. Bulwo, hold on tight to the raft and try to buy yourself time. Another slightly older young man called out hurriedly. These people were all so nervous that their faces and ears were red. Large sweat droplets rolled down, but they didn't even have time to wipe it off. No matter what they did, throwing rocks or hitting the water, they couldn't divert the fish's attention. Their initial target was not the strange fish, but another type of fish that was about the length of 2 humans. The nets they weaved was specifically designed to catch those fish, but they never thought that a strange fish would suddenly appear and kill their target fish. Not only that, it almost ate all of them too. If Bulwo did not go out to divert its attention, they would not have made it to the shore safely. Now, although they were all safe, Bulwo was stuck. He was dragged along with the wooden raft to the center of the river. What's worse, the strange fish did not even try to attack with all its strength. It played with the wooden raft and swam in circles around it. Occasionally it would bump into the raft on purpose and cause the raft to shake violently. The strange fish had probably lost its interest playing with its prey. It finally emerged from the river and revealed its body. Brown-orange tips covered its skin like a thick armor of scales. It glinted in the sunlight, sending chills down their spines. More than half of its triangular head was visible. Half of its body was already above the surface. It had no fear at all and did not worry about the threats anyone could bring. Its jaws were wide open. Then, it bit fiercely onto the wooden raft. Crack! The wooden raft was as thick as a human, but the beast bit off a huge chunk effortlessly. Crack! Another bite. The wooden raft shook violently with every bite. The person on the wooden raft screamed in terror and tried to edge away from the strange fish. Shoot! Hurry! Someone screamed from the shore. We've run out of arrows. Throw rocks. Keep throwing rocks. No, there's no use. Why isn't Daddy here yet? A girl couldn't help but cry out. Not just her. The rest were feeling the same way. Who would have thought that such a powerful fish would appear? No wonder the elders in the tribe didn't let them get close to the water. All they wanted was to catch a giant fish to prove their strength. If they knew such a terrifying monster existed, they would have never come here knowing their own capabilities. This was literally suicide. There was no way their nets could stop that strange fish. Some people wanted to jump into the river to help but were all held back. Whoever jumped in would die. That strange fish no longer felt like playing and would never give them a chance to escape. In the center of the river, the strange fish had already chewed away half of the wooden raft. It was ready to bite again. 2 more bites and it would get to its prey, but after it opened its mouth, it suddenly halted, dropped the raft, and went under. Chapter 636. The Beast Caught Big Brother. T/L note. Just a reminder that beast equals ordinary animal. Fearsome beast equals a type of beast that is more ferocious and its blood has invigorating properties if consumed. Even though the fish reacted fast, it was still a moment too late. A gust of wind swept past. The surface of the river was split apart like a piece of cloth ripped into 2 perfect halves. The strange fish that tried to escape was caught and brought into the air. Following a sharp slicing sound, the pungent, coppery smell of blood spread through the air. Bulwo, who initially wanted to take a chance and jump into the river, felt a sudden shove from the wave. If he did not catch on to the raft, he would have been hit and sent into the air by the sudden impact. River water splashed into his eyes. The ferrous smell spread through the air, but he smelled something else too. When he opened his eyes, he saw something fall from the sky into the river. The water splashed upwards, causing his raft to shake even more. The strange fish was torn into 2 halves. When it fell into the river, the tail half sank while the other half with the head floated to the surface. That half did not sink, so Bulwo could still see the 3 lips of the fish's mouth open and close. It no longer had the same arrogance from before and clung onto its last breath. Everyone, on the shores or the person on the raft, all were shocked by the sudden scene. What was that? Watch out! Bulwo, run, jump into the water, hurry. The people on the shores screamed in terror. The person on the raft also felt like he was targeted by something. When he lifted his head, a giant figure swept past him, so fast he couldn't even react and jump into the water. It lifted both him and the raft into the air. Bulwo looked down as he was lifted quickly off the surface of the river. His terror could be heard through his cry of despair. He had just escaped the mouth of the strange fish, but ended up in the claws of another bird. The reinforcements had just arrived, but even now, nothing could be done. They didn't even have time to fire their arrows. With such fast speed and massive size, it was no ordinary bird. That's a fearsome beast. The person who rushed over shouted. The people along the shorelines could only watch helplessly as the bird flew farther away and soared upward. It slowly disappeared from their field of vision. Seeing the figures disappearing in the distance, a kid who tried to run after it was forcefully pulled back by the others on the shore. When the child snapped back into reality and noticed what had happened, she cried, "The beast took my big brother away." The people who were looking at the bird withdrew their glances and turned over to look at the child. Panting, they were already running as fast as they could, but they were still a step too late. "Didn't we warn you guys to stay away from here? Are you all deaf? You could have died." The leader of the group that had just arrived was so mad that even his beard straightened. He went over and slapped all of them. He did not touch the kid that was crying. After all, she had just lost her big brother. Bulwo. "He's gone, just like that?" someone asked with a trembling voice. "What do you think?" The leading middle-aged man seemed irritated when he pulled on the hunting net that hung from his body. "You think he can survive after being captured by a beast?" As he said this, he turned to look out to the surface of the river. The wind was blowing towards the other side of the river. The remains of the dead fish was drifting to their side, and seeing the movements around its body, the piranhas had already begun to nibble on the dead fish. Would it reach the banks before the piranhas finished it up? This was also why they rarely went into the water. It was too dangerous. They usually readied their nets on the rafts and only withdrew the nets as they approached the shores. If they left the shores, they had no advantage in the river. No matter how powerful their nets were, nothing could save them. It was getting closer to evening. The remnants of the fish finally reached their shore. It was barely recognizable, but they brought it back to their tribe. The team were all feeling sullen as they walked, and they could hear the child sobbing. They had also searched upstream, where the bird flew past. They held on to the hope that maybe they could find him and searched that part of the forest, but they found no trace. People who came into contact with wild beasts all knew what would happen to a child carried away by a beast. It was clear that anyone caught by a fierce beast would only become its meal. Depressed, the team returned to their tribe. At the entrance of the tribe was a giant net woven with thick ropes. The pattern was denser near the center of the net. If seen from far away, a clear picture could be identified. It was a totem sign with crisscross patterns and looked just like a net. When Boolwo woke up, he felt like he had been grabbed by a beast's claws. No, he actually was grabbed by a beast's claws. As he slowly regained his consciousness, he started to remember what had happened before he blacked out. He was not the type who didn't understand anything. If the bird was so massive and could tear the strange fish into two halves, how could it be an ordinary beast? If he was indeed caught by a beast, it was likely that he would be eaten. He finally realized how unlucky he was. No, that's not right. Boolwo moved his body and opened his eyes. The sunlight almost blinded him. After he calmed down and used his hands to block it out, he opened his eyes again. Even moving his hands made his body ache. Alive. He was alive. When he noticed this, he suddenly felt excited. But what actually happened? Before making sure what the situation was like, he did not dare to move recklessly. Sometimes when he encountered wild beasts, he even had to fake his death. What if that beast was still waiting nearby? He slowly turned his head and noticed some strange buildings and people. Boolwo pushed himself up and sat upright. There were a few people around him, either standing or sitting. All of them looked at him with curious eyes. Was this someone's home? He could hear and smell the river. Even though he didn't see it, he was sure about this. Plus, the house was slightly shaking and felt just like when he was on the raft. They're floating on water? Which tribe's houses floated on water? Boolwo couldn't think of anything at the moment. Yo, you're awake? A person who was fiddling with a fishing rod grinned at him. You guys saved me? Boolwo asked. He had never seen these people before. They did not seem like any tribe he knew. He could tell right away. These people were all strong and muscular. Even another girl about the same age as his own sister who was lifting a giant seashell single-handedly looked just as if she was playing with a tiny rock. These people did not look mad or evil. When they stared at him, he felt like a fierce beast in the forest being targeted by hunters. This gave him shivers. Well, guess you could say that. A young man who was sitting on a short wooden stump said. What did he mean by you could say that? His excitement after finding out that he was still alive had slowly dissipated. He mainly thought about these people who were in front of him now. How did they save him? Did they battle the beast? Or did the beast abandon him halfway and leave? How did you all find me? Did you guys see an unusually large bird? A fearsome beast. It was definitely a fearsome beast, Boolwo asked. After he asked that question, he noticed that something wasn't right. These people all smiled at him together. He knew something was wrong. Boolwo scratched the goosebumps that had appeared on his arm. As if he sensed something, Boolwo turned his head and looked behind him, and then slowly looked up. A bird 4 times his height was standing right there, looking right at him. A moment of silence ensued. Chapter 637, You guys are the Flaming Horns? Boolwo was suddenly shocked. Initially, He thought that they were the ones who rescued him, who knew the beast that captured him was part of their gang, human and beast in one team. It was so hard to imagine. Bolwo had always considered himself a bold person, but after the fishing incident and what he saw now, each new incident shocked him more than the previous one. He looked around the room at the people who were all calm and composed. He then looked again at the giant bird behind him. He wanted to shout again, but he forced down his shocked emotions and breathed in deeply. After he calmed down, he thought about what he should do next. You guys. Bolwo pointed at the bird behind, then looked at the people around him. He didn't know what to ask. Seeing how shocked the person was, Shashwan didn't try to beat around the bush. Instead, he said, although we didn't know what happened, I think that to be exact, he was the one who saved you. Saved me? He almost ate me. Bolwo wanted to refute, but after he thought about it, they were probably right. If this bird did not appear in time, he would have been eaten by the strange fish in the river. But why did the bird bring him here after it killed the strange fish? Where is this? Who are you guys? Bolwo stood up and looked around. It was exactly what he thought. They were still on the same river. We are the expedition team from the Flaming Horn Tribe. Shashwan said, I'm not sure where we are, but we're just going downstream on this river. The Flaming Horn Tribe? Bolwo was still thinking of a way to get back, but after hearing Shashwan's answer, he looked at the row of people with surprise. You guys are Flaming Horns? Seeing Bolwo's reaction, Duoli and the others were curious. How did you know about our tribe? Heard about it. Bolwo eyed the people in front of him up and down but didn't say any more. The defensive look in his eyes had not yet faded, but he was a little more curious. I heard that you guys hosted a showing-off feast, is that true? Bolwo couldn't help but ask. He really couldn't imagine there was a tribe capable of hosting feasts. He didn't know what a feast was before, but he understood as soon as his dad explained it to him. After he realized what a grand event it was, he was even more marveled. Could a tribe be that rich? Of course, but that feast ended before the monsoon season. Back then, only 24 tribes went to attend. After the feast, more tribes came to the trading point because it was officially open to the public. Didn't your tribe go over to look? Duoli asked with a cheerful tone as he walked over. It already ended. Where's the Flaming River trading point? Did many tribes visit? Our tribe lives too far away, so we didn't attend. Disappointment flashed across Bolwo's eyes. He also wanted to experience what it was like. But too bad. Which tribe do you belong to? If it's along the way, we can send you back, Duoli asked. After he hesitated, Bolwo said, I'm from the Gu tribe. My name is Bolwo. Gu tribe? They really were the Gu tribe. Before Bolwo even woke up, Shashwan had already guessed his identity. He said that it was very likely that he belonged to the Gu tribe. You're from the Gu tribe? Duoli pointed to the two nets set on the side. Someone from your tribe did visit the Flaming River trading point. Seeing those two nets, Bolwo's eyes brightened. He said excitedly, my dad brought it there. After he said this, Bolwo suddenly felt like he said too much. His dad told him that before he knew more about the Flaming Horn's character, he should always stay vigilant. Even though these Flaming Horns saved his life, it was still better to remain cautious. The Flaming Horn tribe seemed a lot stronger than his. Duoli seemed to have not noticed the defensive look in Bolwo's eyes. He continued, then why didn't you come over with your dad to look? Our trading point is always full of excitement. There's fearsome beast meat, beast hides, and horns. These are all very famous. Hearing Duoli's words, Bolwo put aside his previous thoughts. It's too far, and the roads are too dangerous. We were not allowed to follow. But your tribe even sells fearsome beasts? That's crazy. Hey, of course. Duoli was full of pride. He walked over and put his arms over Bolwo's shoulder in a warm-hearted gesture. He started talking and also introduced a few of them to him, mostly their names. Then he also made a few jokes. As for their position and strengths, he did not mention even a word. Bolwo told them about how he brought a few people to fish but encountered some dangers. He also mentioned how he tried to distract the strange fish, so the others had time to escape. From this Duo Li could guess that Bol Wo was no ordinary person in the Gu tribe. If he could bring people along on a hunt, fishing probably counts as hunting. He was a leader. A leader definitely had a strong influence and fame in the tribe. If it wasn't his strength, then it must have been the influence of other elders. In a tribe, higher ranking meant greater responsibilities. If they encountered any dangers, they also had more pressure than others. There was no such thing as soldiers dying for the sake of their general in the tribes. Whenever there was danger, they always stood in front to protect the others. If they couldn't hold back the threat and could only resort to falling back, they had to do what was most dangerous. Bol Wo was prepared to do such a thing. So Duo Li wanted to talk more with Bol Wo. Perhaps he might even be able to obtain more information. "We're almost there," Shashwan said suddenly. "What?" Bol Wo couldn't understand what Shashwan meant. Duo Li and a few others all looked at Shashwan. Shashwan stood up. "The Gu tribe is nearby." "Really?" Bol Wo was suddenly excited. Nothing could compare to the happiness he felt upon returning to his tribe alive. Duo Li jumped up onto the mast. Standing far up, he took out Shashwan's monoculars and looked far inland. The forest was too dense with trees so he couldn't see anything, but since Shashwan said they were almost here, then it must be true. Bol Wo was excited, but he suddenly thought, have these people even been to the Gu tribe? How did they know they were reaching soon? He was just about to ask, but as he turned around, he saw Shashwan walk towards the fierce bird and hopped onto its back. The boat suddenly shook. Bol Wo almost lost his balance. With a whoosh, a gust of wind blew past them. Bol Wo looked up to the sky, and the giant bird was already up in the air and flying rapidly into the distance. They really could tame fearsome beasts, and they even flew on the giant bird's back. Bol Wo widened his eyes and looked at the giant bird fly away. After a while, Chaka flew back again, except this time, he did not land on the boat. Instead, he swooped back into the air as soon as Shashwan leapt off. He did not leave them but continued to tail the two boats. Pineapple? Shashwan looked over at the person who stood idly on the same spot after he drew what he needed to on his map. A mispronunciation of Bol Wo's name in Chinese sounds like pineapple. Bol Wo looked confused. "Are you calling me?" "Yes, I'm talking to you, Pineapple." "Can you contact your tribe's people directly, like with a whistle or something?" Shashwan asked. "My name is Bol Wo, not Pineapple." Bol Wo corrected him. As he thought about what Shashwan said, he nodded. "Yes." "Do I blow now?" "Wait first. We're not there yet. If you blow now, they might not be able to hear it. I'll tell you when we get there." "All right." Bol Wo was excited that he could return, but he was still fixated on whether he had made the right decision by bringing the flaming horns to his tribe. Shashwan stood at the ship's bow and looked in one direction. In his sea of consciousness, on the very edge of the totem fire's light, a small cluster was becoming more apparent. That was a totem sign covered in mud-yellow flames. The pattern consisted of crisscrossed lines and looked just like a net. Chapter 638, The Gu Tribe. The Gu Tribe. Stilt-style architectures were everywhere. The buildings were very similar to the ones of the drumming tribe, with wooden stilts as the bottom foundation. But the stilts here were taller and thicker. The houses were all 6 to 7 meters above the ground. There were taller buildings more than 10 meters above the ground level too. These houses were not rectangular but round with a pointed top. The roofs were thatched with palm leaves. The diameter of the larger houses was over 20 meters, and the smaller ones less than 4 meters. Under the houses, there were many nets entangled around the bottom stilts. These nets were divided into different layers, and there were items laid on each layer. Some were food, while others were clothing. Some of the nets had confusing patterns and looked messy. People were resting inside the net on the bottommost layer. The rope nets could be used as a hammock, but could also be used to set items out to dry. Meanwhile, in the centermost location within the Gu tribe, inside the largest house, the mood was sullen. Bol Wo's gone. The person who spoke had sparse hair. The clothing he wore was tattered as if branches had cut it. There were even blood markings and unpleasant odor on his body. His tired eyes were bloodshot and hazy. From the twitching muscles on his face and arms, It was clear that this person was not too stable emotionally at the moment. He felt horrible, and he was ready to explode at any moment. The person who sat beside the door answered, Yes. When I got there, I saw the beast take him away. It was silent inside the house again. It was as if time froze for a split second. Actually, Bolwo might still be alive. Amidst the silence, a voice spoke calmly, slicing through the tense atmosphere. The person who was speaking now was a skinny middle-aged man sitting in the corner of the house. Although he didn't look old, he had white hair. There were patches of white and dark brown hair on his head. It looked like the tightly packed patterns seen on checkerboards, and his hair grew past his shoulders. I have not fully recovered, so I can't confirm his exact location, but I can feel that he is still alive, that person said. But he was taken away by a fierce beast. Where can we find him? Another person who was sitting close to the door appeared frustrated. As he spoke, he looked at the others who were all sullen and depressed. Bogu, what's your decision? Bogu rubbed his reddened eyes. He had just rushed back and was already exhausted. He never expected to hear news of his own son captured by a fierce beast. His heart was now full of mixed emotions: anger, sorrow, and all sorts of emotions. But now there were too many things at hand. What can he do? He did not know. Even if he was still alive now, a person captured by a fierce beast probably didn't have much time left. Heaving a deep sigh, Bogu was about to say something, but the person with brown and white hair who was sitting in the corner of the room suddenly made a sound. This sound was not a reaction to anyone in the room. Instead, he sensed something else. What's wrong, shaman? The people inside the house all looked over. The person with brown and white hair had not spoken but turned his head in one direction. Even though the house was in the way and he couldn't see anything, everyone inside the house knew immediately that there was something strange happening in that direction. As soon as their suspicion hit, they heard a continuous lulu sound. It was like a sound made by some aquatic birds. It came from afar. Anyone with weaker capabilities wouldn't be able to hear, but everyone inside the house could hear it. When the people inside the house heard it, their eyebrows jerked and their eyes brightened. Without a word, they rushed out of the house immediately. Bogu ran out the 10-meter-high house. With a simple hook of his hand, he held on to the rope attached to the bottommost layer of netting below the stilts. It eased the impact of his descent, and with a zzz sound caused by the friction of the rope, Bogu slid down like a rock, falling rapidly. All of a sudden, it was as if he turned into a leaf and floated down smoothly. The sound of his landing was as light as the sound of a small rock falling on the grass. It was so subtle and hard to notice. After he landed, Bogu and others who came out of the house ran towards where the sound came from. In the blink of an eye, their figures were gone. After they left, the person who was sitting cross-legged with brown and white hair walked out slowly. His eyes were full of suspicion as he looked in the river's direction. A foreign tribe? Which tribe would be coming at this time of the year? He could feel that these people were not tribes that lived nearby, and they were not any of the tribes he was familiar with. He had never come into contact with them, but these newcomers gave him a special feeling. They were very different from the tribes he had seen before, but he couldn't tell what exactly was different about them. Not long after, someone rushed back from far away. As he ran, he shouted, "Bolwo is back! The brat Bolwo is back!" Hearing the commotion, everyone came out of their houses to look. What? Didn't Bolwo get captured by a fearsome beast? Bolwo's still alive? Where is he? Did the beast bite him? Is he injured? I want to see him. No, don't run around. I will beat you if I see you running around again. You'd better stay in your homes. The person who rushed back ran straight to the largest house. From the bottom, he hopped up to the house on the nets covering the wooden stilts, as if they were mere steps. With a whoosh, he was up. Shaman, someone brought Bolwo back, the person reported. Who? The shaman of the Gu tribe arched his eyebrows. Bogu said they were the Flaming Horn tribe. The Flaming Horns? That fast? The shaman of the Gu tribe was surprised. Bogu had just returned from the trading point. When Shashwan sensed that the Gu tribe was close, he told Bolwo to send the signal. Actually, Bolwo was already familiar with everything on the riverbank. He came here before on a hunt, but he knew that they were not close to their tribe's territory yet, so he didn't blow on the whistle. Now, his uneasy feelings were slowly dissipating. When Shashwan let Bolwo blow the whistle, Bolwo immediately blew a tune that only the people of the Gu tribe knew. This sound was made by two thumbs pressing against each other. Anyone who was not familiar with the technique would find it challenging to master. Even if they succeeded, they could not blow the tune with the same rhythm as the Gu tribesmen, much less send a message using this technique. Now, when Bolwo saw his tribesmen, his anxiety finally calmed. When he noticed his dad on the shore, he was so excited that he wanted to jump onto the shore right away. However, there was still a distance between their ships and the shore, so although they were traveling close to the banks, it was unsafe to stay too close. Shallow waters were dangerous for ships. It was the first time many of them from the Gu tribe saw a floating house. They appeared to be quite astonished. Bogu had seen ships before at the Flaming River trading point. Not only the Flaming Horn ships, but also the ones from other tribes that came by ship to trade at the trading point. So when Bogu saw the two Flaming Horn ships, he wasn't too surprised. He was only shocked by the fact that the Flaming Horns had ships traveling downstream, and also how fast they arrived. They definitely wouldn't start traveling during the monsoon seasons, so they probably departed after the monsoons. That's about the same time they left the Flaming River trading point. They were already rushing back at their maximum speed, and sometimes they didn't even stop at night to rest. More than half of their team were exhausted after returning. Most of them were probably still sound asleep. If Bolwo did not go missing, he would probably be resting at home by now. But these Flaming Horns seemed very energetic. Was it because of their ship? Bogu was still contemplating, but hearing the Flaming Horn ships approaching, he looked over. Bolwo couldn't wait any longer. Before the ship even came to a halt, he already jumped down and waved his arms while he ran towards them. He had just escaped a life-and-death situation, and seeing his own father back home, how could he not be excited? But he did not expect his father to welcome him with his fists. "You never listen. Who told you to mess around?" Bogu waved his fists at his son, who was rushing over excitedly. While Bogu reprimanded his son, Shashwan and the others came down from the boat. The people from the Gu tribe who walked over to the banks looked curiously at Shashwan's group. Some glances were clearly defensive and vigilant. At this time, the shaman of the Gu tribe had already reached the banks. "Welcome to the Gu tribe." Shashwan looked at the shaman of the Gu tribe who was smiling at them. Somehow his tone didn't sound too welcoming. Chapter 639. We don't really want you here. Shashwan's feelings were correct. The people of the Gu tribe were indeed a little defensive towards them, but they did not show it directly. They probably tried to conceal their defensive feelings because they were afraid of the Flaming Horn tribe. Although Shashwan and the others saved Bolwo, even if Chaka captured the person after saving him, it still counted as saving his life. But the Gu tribe's people were acting strange. It was as if they desperately wanted Shashwan and the others to leave. Shashwan could understand if it was their discrimination towards foreign tribes, especially tribes that were stronger than them. It would make them raise their guards, but Shashwan felt that there was something else besides all these reasons. Even so, the people of the Gu tribe also welcomed Shashwan's group to their living headquarters. After all, they were the guests and even saved one of them. They didn't need to draw such clear boundaries so soon. The Gu tribe didn't want to fall out with the Flaming Horn tribe. The people of the Gu tribe were extremely cautious with Shashwan's group. Bogu knew more about the Flaming Horn tribe because he had been to the trading point, so he was a little nervous when he saw Shashwan. Most of the Gu tribe's people wore linen clothing, and they were done quite fashionably. Some even had intricate designs. They probably made these clothes themselves, and they were as good as the Rain tribe. But on their linen clothing, there were also other tightly knitted tassel-like linen fibers attached. All of the Gu tribe's people were used to this fashion and didn't feel at all troubled by the extra tassels on their clothing. When Bolwo was brought onto their ship, his clothing was already tattered, so the linen fibers were not obvious. But seeing so many people of the Gu tribe now, they could finally see the overall characteristics of their tribe. Seeing Shashwan's curiosity in the linen tassels, Bogu explained, The Gu tribe is skilled in making nets, so we bring out nets with us wherever we go. Sometimes when the nets break during a hunt, we can use these to repair them." "I see." With Bogu's explanation, Shashwan finally understood. Different nets were made from ropes with different thicknesses, so the Gu tribe's people always brought along the original materials to fix the nets with the same types of fiber right away. No wonder all of them had different kinds of fiber tassels. It's probably because the materials used to make the nets were not all the same. These tassels could be seen as a fashion accessory but were also very useful. Shashwan and the others didn't feel that anything was wrong, but some people in the Gu tribe looked at them with strange glances. By rights, Shashwan's group saved Bogu's son. It was reasonable that Bogu's attitude towards them was decent, but those people in the Gu tribe who knew him were still surprised because he was too polite. Who was Bogu? The current chief of the Gu tribe. Even though the chief could not be compared to the shaman in the Gu tribe, he was still chief. Bogu rarely initiated any social interactions with any foreign tribes, much less tried to explain anything. Before, Bogu had always been rude to other foreign tribes, but he was different today. Something was strange about his behavior. When they led Shashwan's group into their tribe, the people who came back with Bogu from the trading point had just been woken up by all the commotion. When they went out to look and saw Shashwan's group, they were at first astonished and rubbed their eyes, thinking they were still not awake. After they confirmed that it was real, they also hurried over and looked at Shashwan from time to time with great interest. "Do you guys know me?" Shashwan asked suddenly. Bogu, who was thinking about how he should welcome the Flaming Horn people, looked over and saw what was going on. He didn't try to hide anything. "We just came back from the trading point and we saw you there, Flaming Horn Grand Elder." The Gu shaman, who was squeezed in the middle of the group, looked fiercely at Shashwan. Other Gu people seemed not to have understood anything. They looked at Shashwan, then at Bogu, then back at Shashwan. "Grand Elder, this brat?" "Bogu, you're not mistaken, right?" Bulwo, who had just been hit by his father, also suddenly forgot about his injuries. "What? He's the Grand Elder?" The Gu tribe also had their elders, and they were the same in ranking as the elders in other tribes. This position was either taken by previous chiefs or shamans who had stepped down. Sometimes this title would be given to an elder who had significant influence and contributions, but Shashwan was so young. "He's already an elder?" "No, a Grand Elder." "The Flaming Horn Grand Elder?" It was too much for them to take. No wonder Bogu treated him so politely. It was probably because he knew. The others were all making speculations, but the people who went with Bogu to the Flaming River trading point knew that the Grand Elder of the Flaming Horn tribe was an exceptional position. The Flaming Horns were all very respectful towards him, and when Bogu was at the trading point, he even heard that even people of other tribes, not just their tribe, feared this Grand Elder. When they mentioned the Grand Elder, it was as if they were talking about some scary beast. Shashwan brought 100 of them into the Gu tribe, while the other 100 guarded beside the ships. The total head count in the Gu tribe was slightly more than 3,000, and they were already considered big within medium-small tribes, but it was still a small number compared to the 20,000 population of the Flaming Horn tribe. The Gu tribe indeed did not suffer from any food shortage. The fresh beast meat was enough to fill their bellies. To express their gratitude for saving Bolwo and also to welcome Shashwan's group to their tribe, the Gu tribe set up a feast that afternoon on a vast grassland. It was not a showing-off level type of feast, just the ordinary type of welcoming dinner. They roasted meat on the fire piles and cooked soup in pots. During this time, the Gu shaman also had a small chat with Shashwan's group, but he mainly asked about their purpose for coming here this time. When he found out that Shashwan and the others were only traveling along the Flaming River, the Gu shaman felt relieved. Although he didn't express it, Shashwan could feel it. The people of the Gu tribe were indeed polite, but they gave them a feeling of "please leave as soon as you can." The Gu shaman also shared some valuable information about the tribes that lived downstream from them, and even mentioned a tribe downstream that produced beautiful pearls. This made the group of Flaming Horns excited, especially Duo Li. His eyes lit up as soon as he heard this. "What kind of pearls?" Duo Li asked. The Gu shaman took out a thumbnail-sized pearl from his inner pocket. "A cat-eye stone?" Shashwan seemed surprised. He took the pearl over for a closer look. It didn't look like it was polished by humans. It was more likely a natural product. However, these pearls were slightly opaque, and the eye line in the middle of the stone was a little faint, but these were enough to please Duo Li and the others who came from the other side of the sea. Back when they lived there, stones that couldn't be made into weapons were often more expensive than grains and beast hides because the slave masters loved all sorts of beautiful gemstones. Seeing the flaming horn's interest in the pearl, the Gu shaman's eyes brightened with happiness. After their meal in the late afternoon, the sky had already darkened. The people of the Gu tribe were all heading to their respective homes, but Shashwan and the others did not reside in the cabins provided by the Gu tribe. Instead, they returned to their ships. Although the house was more comfortable, the Gu tribe's fire seed would make it less comfortable there, so it was better for them to return and rest on their ships. However, when Shashwan and the others departed for the river, the Gu shaman said, "Be careful of the water at night." Chapter 640, Movement in the River. The flaming horns became more alert after hearing the Gu shaman's words. The people of the Gu tribe told them that the river was dangerous. There might be strange fish or other creatures. A few warriors from the Gu tribe had already disappeared during their patrolling shifts, and the number of beasts in the forest had also increased. Sometimes Shashwan's group would rest beside the banks at night, but they would also encounter some troubles. But these were just small problems. Compared to the forest full of murderous bandits, this place was a lot safer, but this time, Shashwan didn't want to take the risk. The people of the Gu tribe didn't even find the reason behind their casualties. They did not want to die so meaninglessly. "Guards who are keeping watch tonight, stay alert," Shashwan told them after they returned to the ships. In the Gu tribe, after Shashwan's group left, they no longer added more firewood to the pile. They only waited for the fire to finish burning and slowly die out. Breezes blew past the fire piles, causing the fire's light to flicker and crackle. Inside the Gu shaman's house, besides the shaman, 10 other people came. These were all people who had authority in making decisions, and they included Bogu and other elders of the Gu tribe. A water moonstone glowed inside the house. For tribes like them who lived in houses above the ground, glowing gemstones were always their option for a light source and not fire piles. Fire and torches could easily burn their houses. Besides the water moonstone, they also had other gemstones, but they mostly used water moonstones. They obtained these stones from other people. "Shaman, do you think the flaming horn sensed anything?" someone asked. "It would be even better if they sensed it. Then perhaps they will leave even sooner." The Gu shaman looked down. No one could see his expression. "But what if they don't leave and stay here for a few more days?" that person asked again. "Then we have no other choice. Didn't you say that the flaming horns were strong and could hunt fearsome beasts? If we receive help from them, how do you know they would help us? If they took this opportunity to rob us, what will we do?" an elder said distressfully. "I don't think so," Bogu said. "When we went over to the Flaming River trading point, I saw many things that I never even dared to imagine before. I don't think the Flaming Horn tribe will rob us." "That's only what you think. Who knows if they would suddenly rob or secretly attack us. Even though they only have 200 people, we should know that these people are not easy targets." Plus, even the Grand Elder of the Flaming Horn tribe came. The elder grew even more worried. "The Grand Elder of the Flaming Horn tribe is ... a little strange." The Gu shaman thought they sounded a little weird when they mentioned the Grand Elder. Somehow he felt that this Grand Elder was different from the rest of them. No, all of them, all the people in the Flaming Horn tribe, and all the various tribesmen he had encountered before. The Grand Elder of the Flaming Horn tribe was the only one who was different. "Regardless of whether the Flaming Horns will leave, what we need to do first is to prevent more fearsome beasts from attacking our tribe." As he said this, the shaman of the Gu tribe summoned a fierce murderous aura that surrounded him. This energy was like a net full of sharp blades, and his piercing eyes stared out into the night beyond the house. as if he wanted to see through the darkness and find the hidden figures within. The night grew darker. Even though the sliver of moon in the sky coated the night with a silver light, it was still darker inside the forest. The forest was very dense, and many branches of the trees near the Copw tribe's living headquarters extended above their houses. The branches blocked out the moonlight and covered the round roofs with its shade. The people in the tribe gradually fell asleep. Some of them were already sound asleep, but some of them were still wide awake and listening to the movements outside. In the forest, the guards concealed themselves and blended into the darkness. Even their breaths were in sync with the night breeze. On the ships by the river, the people who were keeping guard observed the surface of the river while the others rested in the cabins on the ships. The night wind blew across the surface of the flaming river, causing waves to form and roll to the shores. Splashes could be heard as waves crashed into the rocks. The ships rocked subtly on the river and creaked softly. Shashwan was getting ready to close his eyes and sleep. He suddenly opened his eyes, rolled down from his bed, and walked out of the cabin. The people who were keeping guard tonight saw him come out suddenly, so they rushed over and asked, "Grand Elder, did you notice anything? Did you guys notice anything?" Shashwan asked. The people who were keeping guard looked at each other and thought, and then one of them said, "We just feel like something's not right. We heard a sound from the forest. It might have come from the Copw tribe. Maybe a beast fell into one of their traps, and they had a small fight. But I'm guessing that the beast escaped, so we didn't hear anything after that." As for the river, something is also strange, but we're not sure exactly what. The people Shashwan brought out this time were all experienced hunters. They had keen senses, and even if they weren't too accurate, they could be sure of what was going on generally. "What's wrong?" Chio walked out from the cabin and looked around. "The river seems peaceful. Just now, the guard said that something was strange about the river, but Chio said that it was peaceful." These two statements did not contradict. It was strange because it was so quiet. Before, even if it were nighttime, fish would swim on the surface from time to time, and they could hear the tails of fish moving across the water. Some of the fish would even jump up and then drop down with a splash, and other fish that preyed on insects would also hide in the shallow areas and wait for the perfect moment to attack. However, they did not hear any fish preying on insects by the shore, nor did they hear any fish swimming or jumping up. Besides the sound of the waves caused by the night wind, nothing else could be heard. Something else remained hidden under the peaceful surface. Shashwan scanned the river's surface and looked at a specific location upstream. "You guys stay here. I'll go take a look over there." As he said this, Shashwan jumped down from the ship and tiptoed after the sounds upstream in the forest. "I'll go too." Chio followed behind Shashwan, and sensing no objection from Shashwan, he continued to follow. It was too dangerous for Shashwan to go alone. If he followed, perhaps he could be of some help. If it were completely dark, Chio's movements would be very limited, but the moon was becoming brighter, so Chio's eyesight was not as limited as time passed. This was also why Shashwan allowed him to follow. There was still a distance from the Copw tribe's living headquarters, so the energy of their fire seed was not that strong here. Shashwan was passing through the forest beside the shore. He ran and stopped. As the wind blew across the forest and caused the leaves and trees to rattle, Shashwan slowly approached a specific area upstream. Seeing Shashwan suddenly stop, Chio also stopped and asked Shashwan with his hand gestures, "Is there a problem?" Shashwan gestured at him to calm down. "Wait for a while." Chio controlled his breath and focused his full attention. He listened to everything around him closely. Suddenly, he felt an itch on his head as if the night wind was reaching freezing point. The sudden cold rushed up to his spine and continued to move upwards, causing him to shiver uncontrollably. The blood in his body screamed, "Danger!" Not far away, they could hear movements in the water, as if something was coming out from the river. However, when Chio was thinking about how he should respond, the feeling suddenly disappeared. The danger that made him break out in a cold sweat gradually diminished. Chio carefully breathed once again. When his sense of danger completely disappeared, he heard rustling sounds coming from the shore, like something was walking across the grassy fields. Chiyo wiped away his cold sweat and looked at Shashwan. Should we make a move? He didn't feel a strong sense of danger, so the sound he heard just now was probably made by some other nocturnal beast. Chiyo did not need to worry about that, but Shashwan waved his hand and gestured for Chiyo to wait. The rustling sounds moved farther away, and once again, the shore was peaceful. Shashwan walked closer to the shore, and finding a suitable place, he hid on a tree and let the branches cover his figure. Breaking off some hollow branches, he looked through them at the location where he just heard something move in the water. Chapter 641, The Beast in the Water. Shashwan and Chiyo stared with their full attention at the river bank. Compared to Shashwan, Chiyo stayed a little farther away from the river bank. He knew his safety limits. If he got any closer than that, he wouldn't be able to hide when the thing appeared, so he didn't want to take any risks. After so many years of hunting, he already knew his safety limits when faced with a fierce beast of a certain level, and he didn't want to risk his life. A sound came from the Gu tribe's location again. Perhaps the patrolling soldiers of the Gu tribe came across another beast, but Shashwan paid no attention to the noise. He concentrated entirely on the movements in the river bank. After about another hour, insects that had started chirping quieted down once again. It's here. Shashwan and Chiyo tensed up in the trees where they hid. They forced all of their pores shut and did not reveal a trace of their aura and breath, in case when the wind blew, their scents wouldn't be detected. They knew the level of the beast they were facing, so they stayed vigilant. When ripples formed in the water, it seemed like something was moving towards the riverbank from inside the river. Water trickled down the figure that rose from underwater, and moonlight reflected off its wet figure. Under the moonlight, a strange creature came out from the river. Shashwan couldn't tell what it was for a while. He only knew that this was a giant beast because the trickle paths on the creature's back was unusually long. Perhaps the water was flowing down from the creature's back and spine. The part of the creature above water was around 10 meters tall, but Shashwan still couldn't tell how tall or wide the creature was underwater. He didn't dare to keep looking in the beast's direction because intelligent beasts were usually sensitive to being watched. Shashwan relaxed and looked over with a different vision. Now, Shashwan was really shocked. The river, leaves, and trees all disappeared. Only the rocks and branches appeared as different shades of gray. It was as if the world's skin had been stripped off, and only light outlines and structures were left. There, a massive beast skeleton was approaching them. How big was it? Shashwan couldn't be sure, but judging by its skeletal structure, it was about 20 meters long if it crawled on the ground. The skeleton of the creature looked like a long lizard, but its neck was a lot longer than a lizard's, long enough so only its head protruded from the river, and its body remained underwater. Its thick hind limbs were close to each other and it looked like an alligator waddling in the water. Its front limbs were thinner and would paddle once or twice as it swam forward. As for the head, Shashwan looked closer. In his special vision, he could see there was not only a giant beast's head, but also another skeleton of a smaller beast. The beast was biting on a smaller beast in its mouth. When the giant beast almost reached the shore, Shashwan looked away and no longer stared in its direction. Suddenly, it was as if a sharp vision beam scanned across the region. Even though the vision was formless, Shashwan felt as if an invisible cold blade scraped across his body. That was the beast scanning the area before it approached the shore. Shashwan looked away because he didn't want to come into eye contact with the giant beast. If their eyes met, no matter how hard Shashwan tried to hide, he wouldn't be able to escape the beast's eyes. This was his speculation. He was sure that beasts had this ability. After so many years of hunting, Shashwan rarely felt this way. It was a fearsome beast. There was no doubt about it. It came from the forest on the other side of the river, but compared to the beasts that the Flaming Horn hunting team usually hunted, Shashwan felt that this beast would be trickier to tackle. It wasn't because they've never hunted any beasts that were larger than this one. The one that they used as a skeleton and the one they used to decorate the Beast Fang Gate during the Flaming River Grand Feast were all giant beasts, but Shashwan felt that this one was going to be more troublesome. If they were not careful, they might even lose their lives. The two of them hid in the trees and held their breaths. It was like they became two solid rocks. The beast scanned the area and didn't notice any strange movements, so it came onto the shore. Shashwan looked over. The giant beast was still in the water, but it set down the remains of the smaller beast that it held in its mouth on the bank. Shashwan did not need to use his special vision at all to see the beast in its entirety because there was no way it could hide its giant body in the shallow waters near the river banks. Stripes coated his entire body and resembled the marine plants in the river. The color of its back and front differed, and even though its torso was not completely revealed, Shashwan could make out patterns on its neck. Its dark-colored back with subtle stripes contrasted with its paler ventral side and created a camouflage effect. This allowed the beast to swim in the river without being easily noticed. Its skin wasn't smooth, and the bulges in its body were still dripping wet, reflecting the silver light of the moon. They carried the deathly cold energy of metallic weapons. Its head was not significant compared to its body and looked like a slanted shield. On its head was a segment of long bone-like structures that looked like horns but not as clearly differentiated as horns. Even though Shashwan couldn't see the entire beast clearly, judging by the part he could see and its entire skeletal structure, it was a powerful pursue and attack type of beast. What was such a powerful fierce beast creeping here near the shore? What was it worried about? Did it have other intentions? Even though it had a mouth full of sharp blade-like teeth, it didn't use any force when it was biting the smaller beast. Shashwan could tell that it was trying to avoid hurting the smaller beast. If it were this simple, most people would have guessed that it was a mother beast carrying its cub. But this was not the truth. Shashwan did not know whether the giant beast was male or female, but he was sure that the smaller beast was a different species. That beast was not a cub. It was just a smaller beast, and it was already at a mature age. Shashwan had come across beasts like these before. Their bodies were over 3 meters long, and they were violent carnivores. They were not at all placid creatures. These beasts were brutal and bloodthirsty. The smaller beast did not move at all after it was set down. Its limbs were frozen as if it were already dead. After the giant beast set the smaller beast on the shore, it looked in a direction on land. Shashwan's eyelids twitched. That was where the Copw tribe was located. Did it hold a grudge against the Copw tribe? It had not even been a year since the Great River disappeared. How did the Copw tribe provoke such a fierce beast? The giant beast stared at the direction for a long time, and then its eyes swept and scanned in all directions. Its murderous energy was a few times more violent than the vision scan from before. Even the night wind was disrupted, blowing up more leaves in the forest. Dead silence. Rustle. It was a subtle sound, but it stood out in the dead silence. People with sharp ears could hear it right away. The giant beast withdrew his gaze and turned his head to look at the smaller beast, who was shaking its leg. The rustling, frictional sound was made by this beast when it shook its leg and rubbed against the grass. Whoosh! Without another look at the shore, the giant beast dived into the water again and left. The splash wasn't loud. It wasn't as loud as the sound of the windswept waves hitting on the shore. As it left, because the beast no longer chewed on anything, its entire body went underwater, and the long ripple patterns grew faint and disappeared. The oppressive tension was gone. Amidst the grass, the insects began to chirp again, except this time, they did so discontinuously, testing to see if it was safe to do so. The riverbanks returned to its original peace. The smaller beast that the larger beast was chewing on got up on its feet and ran like the wind into the forest. It was afraid that it might have to die if it was too slow. Chapter 642, The Underground People. Shashwan and Luo carried the small beast the large beast was dangling from its mouth. It thought it had escaped from danger to only get killed by Shashwan. Brother Zhuan, you went out again tonight to hunt? Guang and the other were still awake. For some reason they couldn't fall asleep. The anxiousness just didn't leave them. Hence, after they heard Shashwan and Luo went out, they just stayed out of the ship waiting for them. Is this for us to eat? That's great. I was hungry. Hee hee. Halfway through his snickering, as if something got stuck in his throat, he stopped. He stared blankly at the beast Shashwan threw over. The people on night watch also leaned in to look. They immediately saw the bite marks on the beast. Although the large beast didn't directly bite the smaller one, as it threw it over, it still left a sizable bite mark on it. This bunch of tribesmen were familiar with all sorts of beasts, but they were no experts on bite marks, so they could only guess. Copw reached out to check the marks. It's a huge one. I wonder why this little guy didn't get injured much. I wonder too. Chio let out a long sigh that seemed to squeeze out all his nervousness from his body. Copw looked at Chio and pointed to his own lip and asked, "What happened?" Chio lifted his hand to rub his bloody lip, was surprised. Right before the beast left, Chio gritted his teeth to maintain a calm appearance, but he did it so hard that blood came gushing out from his gums. It didn't show because his mouth was shut, but as soon as he relaxed, it came flowing out. As soon as the beast left, all the pores in his skin opened, following the muscles in his body releasing. Just in a few breaths, Chio's whole body was drenched in sweat. "That shocked the life out of me." Chio explained what he saw to the others. His view wasn't as clear as Shashwan's, but it was still good enough to know the gist of what happened. "Brother Zhuan, what should we do with this?" Guang poked the small beast with his sword. "Are we eating it?" "No. Leave it for now. I'll bring it along for the discussion at Gu Tribe tomorrow," said Shashwan. "What are you going to discuss?" "Don't they want us to leave as soon as possible?" Duoli was intrigued by the beautiful pearls the shaman had mentioned, but he could still read between the lines to know that the Gu Tribe didn't want them there. "I also want to know how they got into such a big mess." Shashwan was still in confusion, and the Gu Tribe didn't seem to want their help. Maybe they didn't want others to find out. A peculiar aura haunted the riverside for the night. Although Shashwan and Chio had left the area, they knew the large beast didn't rest and continued moving things. It was only until dawn came when the atmosphere loosened up a little. Some fish started swimming around in the river too. The beast Shashwan killed didn't know how to swim, but it was obvious that there was a reason the larger beast had moved them here, and the Gu Tribe had the answer to that question. The next day, Shashwan brought 10 people to the Gu Tribe while holding the beast he killed last night. "Is the chief in?" "I'm looking for him." Shashwan saw the guard at the outskirts of the tribe. They didn't expect the Flaming Horn people to show up again, but they also didn't want to cause delays, so the guards quickly sent a message and brought the guests to Bogu's house. The beast Shashwan carried caught the attention of many. Although it was just a small beast to the Flaming Tribe members, the people here rarely saw any kind of beasts. In addition to that, Shashwan was carrying that 3-meter-long beast as if he was carrying a shirt. It seemed that the rumor that the Flaming Horn tribe members are super strong was true. As Bogu noticed the beast Shashwan was carrying, he frowned and asked, "I assume you had a good night's rest? Where did you get this?" "We just hunted it yesterday," Shashwan said as he threw the beast down right in front of Bogu. The few closer to Bogu rushed to the floor to take a closer look at the beast. Their eyes were blank, but a frown hung on their faces. It felt that they had something to say to Shashwan but weren't sure how to. Bogu closed his eyes to think of a reply, then shifted his gaze to Shashwan. "It seems that there are more beasts here now. It is best for you to leave soon. We hunt more than we farm." Shashwan looked at the Gu Tribe members and saw that they didn't have anything to say. "Fine, we'll go soon, since you said so." "This is for you." Shashwan instructed the others to leave the tribe. As they were leaving, Duo Li looked at the Gu people and said to Shashwan, "If they wanted to hunt, they could just ask us for help. We have so much experience. This is a great opportunity for them." Duo Li asked again, "Are we leaving now?" "Why? What are you thinking about?" asked Shashwan. "Nothing. I'm just curious how they would solve this." Shashwan thought for a while and said, "Maybe they already have a plan, a huge one too." "Really? Why not we stay for a few more days and see how they solve this?" "I really don't know how the other tribes hunt." Duoli's eyes were gleaming brighter than gemstones at this point. The other tribe members were curious too. It would be a great learning experience to observe how other tribes hunt. They were interested in knowing how the Gu tribe would hunt without the super strength the Flaming Horn members had. As the Flaming Horn people were still deciding whether to stay on to see how things play out, Bogu had already dismissed his tribe members while looking somberly at the beast on the ground. He then walked to the wooden frame at the bottom of his house. The frame was surrounded by tightly coiled nets for privacy. Bogu walked to the center of the frame and stomped 3 times. With every step, it felt that a wave was sent out in a circle, moving the grass as they passed. After 3 steps, Bogu stood still. As he felt a push from the ground, he took a step back. A thick wooden cover emerged on the spot he was originally standing at. It was covered by a thick layer of soil with some grass on top. It was an entrance to a cave. The entrance opened and someone appeared. His face was filthy. His nose poked out from the ground, and before he fully came out of the hole, he laid beside the cave. With a yawn, he asked Bogu, "What now? Is it safe down there now?" asked Bogu. Impatiently, the man replied, "Of course, why else would I be able to sleep here? It gets noisy at night, you all are too loud." The man spoke quickly, in a squeaky voice. It would be hard for people that weren't familiar with him to understand what he was saying. However, Bogu seemed to have caught every word he said. Bogu didn't seem to care about his complaints too and only said, "I'm glad it's safe." Then, he turned to leave. The person prepared to head back into the cave to sleep but suddenly remembered something and asked, "Were the Flaming Horn Tribe's people here?" "Yes." Bogu had a blank expression. He didn't seem to want to continue speaking. "I never met them before. I heard they looked like beasts. Is it true? With fangs, claws and tails?" "No, there was nothing special about them." "I don't believe it. Are they still here? I want to take a peek." "No. They left." "Why aren't you asking for their help?" "I heard they were skilled hunters. If you had their help your life would be easier." "This is a matter of the Gu tribe. We don't need them interfering," said Bogu blankly. "Oh, since it is a matter of the Gu tribe, then our tribe won't interfere either." The person saw that Bogu had no reaction to his statement and closed the entrance to the cave. The ground was back to its original state. Bogu took a deep breath and stopped himself from stomping around the entrance. "Let's see if he can sleep then." With another deep breath, he headed to the shaman's house. Chapter 643, The Shaman from Gu Tribe. Shashwan and his group didn't hang around the Gu Tribe for long. They knew the other tribe was wary of them. "Grand Elder, are we really going to leave?" Kuntu asked as they got onto the ship. He really wanted to stay to see how the Gu tribe would deal with things. "There's no point staying any longer. Also, they would delay their plans even longer if we stick around." Shashwan waved his arm to signal the people on the ship to start moving. "I think they are preparing for something big." "Something big? What could it be?" Some people started discussing while crowding closer to Shashwan. "How would I know?" Shashwan spat the sentence and continued finishing the map. The sail was raised. The 2 boats creaked as it drifted further away from the shore, starting this journey down the river back to Flaming Horn. Although the boat had left, the people on it were still distracted. They looked back to the Gu tribe from time to time. They didn't know much about the Gu tribe. They also knew that they had a lot left that they hadn't seen, especially after Shashwan said the tribe was preparing for something big. Their bodies were itching to stay there and observe more. Ugh! Duoli scratched his head as he headed into the lower deck for a nap. It was his turn to guard the ship later that night. When the 2 ships left, the few figures at the shore headed back too. "Are they gone?" Bogu asked the people that returned. "Yes, I saw them leave with my own eyes," said a tribe member. "If that is the case, we should move now." Since they decided to not receive any help from the Flaming Horn Tribe's people, they shouldn't regret it now. "Tell everyone to get ready." Bogu headed to the shaman's house after finishing his sentence to convey the news to the shaman. The shaman was the only person in the house at that time. He had closed the area after Bogu told him about the Flaming Horn Tribe. The Gu tribe's fire seed was very near here. One could see the flame burning away in the fire pond. Facing the fire point, the shaman sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. He reached out and dipped his right thumb into a sticky dye that was sitting in a wooden bowl. He then rubbed it across the piece of linen in front of him. The cloth wasn't big, it was around half a meter square. After the initial stain, The shaman went to work and drew a simple abstract drawing. It became more obvious what he was drawing as he got closer to finishing the painting. He had drawn a person standing upright, one arm was lifted up while the other was pointing to the ground as if he had just thrown something. Beside the man was a net cast open. After completing the drawing, the shaman kept his thumb between the drawn man and net, his eyes still closed. After a moment, the shaman lifted his thumb and opened his eyes. He stared at the fire pond for a long while before getting up to walk into a room in the house. It was the room where they kept the ancestral records. The Gu tribe preferred to keep their records on cloth, unlike many other tribes that used leather. However, the cloth they used was unique. They did something different in every aspect of the cloth-making process to make a cloth with such a texture that it remained soft for thousands of years. The shaman went straight towards a short table in the room. There was a scroll placed on top of it. This scroll was taken out and placed here during the time Bogu left the tribe. The shaman would come here every day to look at it. He pulled it open and sighed when he saw the drawing on it. It was an abstract piece with a beast and some people attempting to hunt it with a net. For it to be recorded like this meant that this was something significant. The person that drew did know that this wasn't a normal hunting trip. If Shashwan was here, he would recognize the beast on the scroll as the beast he saw yesterday. Their appearance was very similar with just some differences, maybe because of the art style, but it was definitely it. This Gu tribe scroll, in particular, was over 1,000 years old. 1,000 years ago, before disaster struck, before the large river was formed, this piece of land and the land of beasts were connected together. The shaman let out a long sigh and closed the scroll. The moment it was shut, all of the worries he felt all converted into something else. A strong urge to kill, full of determination. It's been 1,000 years, this must end. Shashwan was very confused when he saw the beast then. He had no idea how the Gu tribe had angered such a beast. Last year when the disaster caused the river to disappear, the Flaming Ron tribe weren't able to stop all the beasts, but they didn't attract such a powerful enemy that was hidden deep in the forest in such a small time. The beast was quite peculiar too. It started to move smaller beasts to the other side of the river to test the tribe's people. This meant that it was rather cunning, but it was being overly careful. The truth was that this grudge had started 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, when both sides were still connected, the tribes by the river always encountered beasts. The painting on the scroll depicted a hunt 1,000 years ago. Then, the Gu tribe ancestors already had their eyes on the beast. They were ready to kill it, but the beast had escaped. Soon after, disaster struck and a large gap appeared in the river. Dangerous currents and even more dangerous beasts appeared in the river, dividing the two banks even more. That was why the tribes had lived 1,000 years without beasts. The beasts from the other side of the river were killed every time they crossed over, so they stopped coming too. Now, with the physical gap gone, the beast was back for vengeance. 1,000 years had passed. The hunting ancestors of the Gu tribe were long gone, but the beast was now larger and smarter. It was the kind of immortal beast that would continue growing as long as it was alive. It hadn't forgotten about the time their ancestors cut off its claw. It was here to make the tribe members pay. Why was it extra careful this time? Although the beast was much stronger now, it still couldn't help but feel fear whenever it was near the Gu tribe fire seed. Getting half of its claw chopped off and almost thrown into a pot for cooking was something it still remembered well. Not many knew about this secret, and it had been a long time since they dealt with this beast. To prevent the whole tribe descending into panic, the shaman decided to wait for Bogu to return before doing anything. Naturally, Bogu didn't know what had happened on his way back from the Flaming Horn trading point, or he wouldn't have dared to go to the river to fish. If he was in the tribe and he knew the truth, he wouldn't have told the whole truth to his son. Instead, he would drop hints and stop him from going to the river. After Bogu returned, some of the core members of the tribe knew the truth, but from that day on, the shaman decided to tell every member of the tribe what had happened. The shaman felt that this was purely a Gu tribe problem, so they shouldn't ask for help from other tribes. Their ancestors left them an unfinished task and they had to be the ones that completed it. The shaman then wrote a sentence on the drawing too: if seen, kill immediately. The shaman then probably knew the dangers that beast brought to their tribe. However, the disaster then stopped them from thoroughly solving the problem. Knocks on the door stopped the shaman's train of thought. Through the rhythm and the force of the knocking, the shaman knew who it was standing outside the door. Even without listening to the knocks, he would still know. He could sense everyone in the tribe. There was a reason why he was the shaman. Enter. The powerful gaze he had while looking on the scroll immediately disappeared. His expression went back to a neutral state as he left the room. It was Bogu. Bogu knew that the shaman should be the one that decided one thing. Every time before they went on a hunt, the shaman would conduct divination readings to check whether it was the optimal time for hunting. Bogu was here just for that. "How is it, shaman?" asked Bogu. 3 days later, said the shaman. "Understood. I will send away those who cannot fight within these 2 days." Chapter 644. The Ritual. The Gu tribe was preparing for something big. They were going to fight a battle that had been delayed for 1,000 years. To protect the weaker members of the tribe, Bogu made arrangements immediately after leaving the shaman's house. The main area of battle was where the tribe was located itself. They were one of the few tribes that would choose to battle at their home ground, and to protect those that aren't participating in the battle, they had to clear out the whole tribe. Bogu's plan was to bring those members of the tribe away through the Ya tribe's cave and then find a place for them to hide. The Ya people were not strong fighters, but they were good at hiding. The person who emerged from the ground at Bogu's house was from the Ya tribe. They wouldn't fight with them, but they would help send the Gu people away. Hence, on the next 2 days, the elderly, women and children all carried small sacks and crawled into the cave. From there, the Ya people directed them to where they needed to go. More beasts showed up too within the 2 days. The people patrolling at night could clearly hear the sounds of the waters splashing about. The beasts were no longer hiding themselves. The guards stopped walking around the river banks as a safety measure. On the 3rd day, the Gu tribe was very quiet. No one was out and about anymore. As the sun hung brightly in the sky, the shaman walked out of the house and went towards the fire pond. The members of the tribe followed suit. Before the hunt, they had an important ritual to conduct. For them, this was a tool and their belief. Although others may not see the usefulness of a net, this was something the Gu tribe did before and after hunting. Just like how the Flaming Horn members would wash their blades, the Gu tribe had a similar ritual. The more important the ritual, the more complicated it was. For many tribes, hunts only needed warriors, tools and strength, but the Gu tribe believed that there was something else more important: rituals. If they didn't proceed with their ritual, they would feel that no matter how much strength or what tools you had, it wouldn't be a satisfactory hunt. The ritual would give power to their hunting nets, which would bring them the luck they need. They wouldn't miss their prey and catch an abundance of game. The shaman was the main character for all rituals, this one included. Without the shaman, the ritual wouldn't be able to happen. In the eyes of the Gu people, hunting was a shamanic activity. The shaman decides when to hunt, how to hunt and every other aspect. They mainly used nets to hunt, and the shaman would tell them how to use it, which was why the shaman's position in this tribe was so important. They could do without a chief, but they couldn't do without a shaman. When the shaman reached the fire pond, the rest had arrived. Nets filled the whole pond. The hill of nets had covered up the flame from their sight, but it didn't extinguish it. If one looked closely, the nets here were different from the ones they usually used. This beast was different from anything they faced before, so they had to use the best nets they had. These were made from the best material that they collected throughout the years, a net that was much stronger than the average straw net. "Are you ready?" The shaman looked at the people around him. "Ready." Bogu scanned the faces there. A total of 1,300 of their members were here. The junior totemic warriors would be placed in the outskirts of the tribe, while the more experienced warriors would stay in the center. "If that is the case, let's begin," the shaman declared solemnly. The crowd moved into a line. This wasn't their first time doing the ritual, so they didn't need instructions. Bogu stepped to the front of the fire pond and stopped. He then extended his palm. The shaman took out a long and narrow leaf. The dried leaf was thin and looked as if it would crumble as soon as someone touched it. The shaman held the leaf with 3 fingers and flicked it like a sword. He then used it to cut Bogu's palm. The blood followed the leaf's path, dripping down in a straight line from Bogu's palm into the fire pond. The whole process didn't take longer than a breath. Bogu moved away to let the second person step forward. He did the same movements as Bogu. Every tribesperson that would join the battle sacrificed a drop of blood into the fire pond. Although there were 1,000 people, it didn't take too long. When the last person was down, it had only been half an hour. The shaman took the leaf from the last person and stuck it into the mountain of nets. What did the net represent? To conquer, to vanquish. Their presence radiated out of the ceremonial area. The burning passion of the Gu tribe warriors could be felt from even the outskirts of the tribe. The birds and insects that lived here were long gone. The Gu people didn't want the Flaming Horn tribe people here also, because once the nets were activated, the Flaming Horns would not have a chance to act. Plus, they might even interfere with operations. Beneath the tranquil flaming river surface, something stirred. Something large was about to break the surface soon. Chapter 645. Lure and Chase. When the ritual was completed, the sun was already high up in the sky, its scorching rays burning up the ground. The Gu people had their backs drenched in sweat, but there was not even time to wipe their sweat. They quietly formed into the groups they were assigned to and went off to the places they needed to go. Everyone got into formations. The archers got their bows. The front line was ready to run. The warriors had their nets ready. They were all nervous. This was the first time they had to fight a beast that powerful in 1,000 years. With everyone else in position, the shaman stood alone by the fire pond. He held a disc made from fibrous hemp tightly coiled together, its diameter as long as a palm and nearly an inch thick. It was connected to a handle, which was where the shaman held it. He lifted his arm to let the disc face the flaming river. He moved slowly until he reached a certain spot where he suddenly stopped. He focused on that area with a gaze as sharp as a knife, as if his eyes cut through the forest straight at the river. The shaman maintained his pose. The mountain of nets had been removed already. All that was left in the pond was the lone flame that looked like the only flower blooming in a garden. Whoosh! The flame flickered violently. Loud sounds of waves crashing came from the direction of the river. "It's here." The shaman gripped the handle a little tighter. He was nervous, but as the shaman, he couldn't show it. He had to maintain his calmness for the sake of the others. He decided to attack today because his divination told him now was the best chance they had. The weather was good. No rain would disturb them. It wasn't too humid or dry, which was ideal for the warriors. Most importantly, they had the highest chance of succeeding today. The beast wouldn't attack in the morning. Even if it was tired of waiting, it would strike during the night, but the night was too disadvantageous for the tribe's people. Hence, the shaman had to attract it here with a bait. He used a simple trick that was passed down in the Gu tribe. He deepened the beast's hatred for the tribe. As soon as the hatred was large enough to consume its emotions, it wouldn't be able to think logically. The splashes got louder, but the trees blocked the tribesman's view. However, the shaman could guess what was going on from the sounds. The bait was a success. The shaman let out a tiny breath of relief. He still was on his toes, staring at the direction of the river. The disc shook in his hands. He couldn't help it. Stopping it would require energy and attention he cannot afford to waste. Thud. The ground shook. Thud, thud, thud. It got louder and louder, each thud more urgent than the last. It has come up the bank. Although the forest here was dense, it was nothing compared to the ancient forest on the other side. The tribes here had to use a lot of resources to survive, so there weren't that many ancient trees here. This was a problem for the large beast. It couldn't walk through the tiny gaps. The large beast just smashed through the area like a tank, knocking down everything in its path to its feet. After a deep breath, the shaman said, "Go." It wasn't loud. In normal situations, anyone slightly further away wouldn't be able to hear it, but for the hidden Gu warriors, they immediately heard the order. Bogu looked at the large beast that had finally shown itself. A drop of sweat dripped down from his cheek. his heart beating out of his chest. This was his first time encountering such a large beast. He had seen the bones of such beasts in the Flaming Horn trading point, but they were just bones. Now, he was looking at a live one. "Don't panic, stay calm, calm." Bogu's shaking hand calmed with his emotions. Then, he pulled up his arrow as confident as ever. The other hidden warriors moved as soon as they heard Bogu. Some would lose their accuracy from the shock, but it was fine. Now was only the beginning. They had to push on no matter what. The large beast kept using smaller beasts to test them, but the warriors did end up improving from the attacks. They were nowhere near the level of their ancestors since they lacked the experience. If it wasn't for the disaster last year, they would have continued a life separated from beasts, but now they had to adapt to this new environment. Gritting through their teeth, the warriors pushed their totemic powers to the max, letting it flow throughout their body. Tens of figures weaved around the forest like shooting stars, but the arrows proved to be useless against the shield-like skin the beast had. Clang, clang, clang. The arrows hit onto the beast's body and let out a sound that resembled metals banging on each other. The beast's long neck seemed to be a weak point, but it was still covered with scales which acted like armor for the beast. The stone arrowheads had no impact on the beast other than leaving small scars. It didn't help that they broke on impact too. The beast shook its head to avoid the arrows aimed for its eyes. Its gaze was sharp as it looked around with anger. After being baited by the shaman, it looked even scarier. A malicious aura radiated out from its scales, jaws agape. Its sharp teeth crunched through branches effortlessly. The Gu tribe knew that there was too big of a difference between the power levels of the beast and them. If they continued using their traditional hunting methods, it would be a lost cause for them. It wouldn't be easy to win. Chapter 646. Trap and Catch. A piercing roar that sounded like two stones grinding onto each other asserted a pressure onto the forest as if a hand was pushing down on it. The sounds of the arrows hitting the beast never stopped. In reaction to that, the beast lifted up one claw and smashed everything blocking its way to vent its anger. Bogu realized that there was something weird about the beast's claw. It was not whole, distorted like a part had been chopped off by someone. He was right, that was the claw. 1,000 years ago, when their ancestors were hunting this beast, it managed to escape but not fully, running away with only this half of its claw. Now, the wound was fully healed and some of it had grown back, but it didn't look like a claw, so it looked off. This version of the claw was much weaker and less agile than the other claws it had. The beast seemed to remember the reason its claw was deformed in the first place, so it let out another loud roar and went after the people shooting the arrows. The archers continued their volley of arrows and tried to lure the beast into their tribe. If it was any other species, they would drive it out from the back, but this one was special. They had to lure it from the front. The beast had the upper hand in this fight. Trees tumbled down as a new path was created. Wood chips and leaves flew everywhere, with the trunks itself getting pushed down too. The only thing left was some tree roots and pathetic-looking stumps. This beast was not as big 1,000 years ago. It was probably the same size as the smaller beasts they encountered a few days ago. Naturally, the hunting methods they used and their ancestors used were different. Hence, the beast was not familiar with the Gu tribe's way of hunting. It could not remember the traditional methods too, as 1,000 years was quite a long time ago. After testing the tribe members, it decided that they weren't that much of a threat. It still had a fear of them from the trauma 1,000 years ago, but all that fear had turned into anger. Kill. That was the only thing it was thinking of. It could see the Gu houses ahead. Trap. A sound rang in the tribe people's minds. That was the next step. Swoosh. Ropes shout out from the top, bottom, left, right, all around the beast. At the same time, right below its legs, a net sprung up. The soil and leaves covering it flew up with it. The moment it lifted its hind leg, the net closed, immediately binding its claw. The beast stopped in its tracks for a moment. With a powerful swing, it dragged up the whole patch of forest around it. The net had been attached to these trees. The hidden warriors were all exposed now. They quickly ran to set up the next net. That was only one of the first hidden nets. There were still many more to come. One net wouldn't be able to do much, they needed many. The beast was already in their net zone. They had to continuously trap it here through one net after another. If Shashwan was here, he would recognize that the system here they were using was very similar to his consecutive trigger system but more complicated. If the system he used involved simple to mid-tier traps, the system here required mid-tier to advanced traps. To connect a net to another one and ensure its efficacy, one had to master the technique and have enough time and energy to complete it. It wasn't too hard of a task. Currently, the people in charge of the nets in the Gu tribe were working like well-oiled machines without the commands of a leader to set up that huge net. Even people that usually didn't get along had set aside their differences for the mission. Other than that, the net itself didn't receive much damage. The trees around it had broken but the net was still intact. The rope wasn't that thick but it was very strong. There was some red peeking out at the beast's foot where it was tied. That was the net that went through the ritual. This kind of net was usually used on tricky opponents. 1,000 years ago, it was a common net for the Gu tribe but as they encountered fewer beasts throughout the years, they had no use for it. Now, 1,000 years later, this net was back in use. More and more nets circled around the beast's legs. More and more ropes went around its body. They all seemed insignificant compared to the beast's size but the number of ropes and nets increased with every step the beast took. The nets and ropes reminded the beast of several nasty experiences, causing it to get even crankier, its eyes getting wilder. The shaman looked at the beast stepping into the tribe and once again shouted, "Go!" Bogu jumped onto the beast's back, his totemic powers surging through both of his arms. With one huge swing, he stabbed right into the beast's neck with full force. If this was a normal beast, it would have dropped dead to the ground. This beast would surely at least get injured, right? The moment the blade hit the beast, a sharp clank could heard and Bogu's arm immediately felt numb from its vibration. There was only a small scratch on the beast's neck. There was no blood to be seen anywhere. With such a hit, the skin had still not cracked. Bogu looked at the sword in his hand. It had cracked and was useless now. Panic and fear struck into the Gu people's minds. All of them were using stone tools. What were they going to do now? Even after knowing that their tools didn't have much effect on the beast, they must continue their plan. Right at that moment, the two ships that were supposed to head downstream were heading back up. Chapter 647, Burn. Within the Gu tribe, when the beast walked into the village, it was already covered in nets. However, these rope nets weren't strong enough to stop it from walking. There was no way they would be able to catch it with just the nets. Just to put on more nets, the Gu tribe had to pay a hefty price. Tens of their people had died. Currently, if they continued to hold on like this, the death toll would only increase. Sustaining major injuries would be considered the best-case scenario when facing a beast like this. The shaman watched as the beast got closer and closer, his calm eyes suddenly showing more and more worry. Not enough. It really wasn't enough. This really wasn't enough nets to get the results he wanted. Even with preparations, the shaman had underestimated the beast. The people working the nets were trying their best. The shaman couldn't tell them to do anything else. The root cause of this was their inexperience. They had missed too many opportunities to act. The shaman looked at the beast carefully. Is that it? No, there's still a gap. If we can fill it, we can make it. Two warriors struck from above, each carrying a rope. Although they were quick, the beast was quicker. When the two noticed the sound of the wind whooshing, they tried to avoid the claw aiming at them but sadly they failed. The two fell from the sky like shooting stars, heading head down into the forest, leaving a path of red in the sky. It was too late. The people holding the nets were at their limits. The shaman looked at the approaching beast and took a step back. They didn't have any better weapons. They didn't have strength like the Flaming Horn warriors. Their nets couldn't tame this wild beast but they still had one last trick up their sleeve. Burn. Whoosh. All the nets were lit on fire. Its head, neck, body and limbs that were wrapped by nets were set ablaze. The fire seemed to come from the nets itself. The nets didn't seem to burn away like wood did. They kept their shape with only the color turning slightly redder. To lure, chase, trap, capture and burn were the basic steps of the Gu tribe way of hunting. They rarely used the last step as it really was just a preventative measure. Even their ancestors rarely used the last step during their hunts. Unfortunately, after 1,000 years later, They were forced to use this step. Most of the warriors had no experience with this move. For many of them, this was their first time in battle. The aura of the fire seed immediately was felt by everyone there, especially by the beast. The area was currently the place where the aura was strongest other than the fire pond. The ancient fire seed was meant to protect the people, and this naturally would scare any beasts. The moment the ropes burst into flames, loud howls from all over the place suddenly stopped. The only one that was heard came from the beast that was very close to the fire pond now. The tough scales that stone tools weren't able to break open were darkening at beneath the flames. This was the power of the ancient fire seed. The beast stopped in its tracks from the pain it felt from the fire. It let out a chain of painful roars. The strong current in the air caused the roof of the house to go flying up. Did it work? Did we succeed? Bogu and the rest felt joy and relief. The stone that was weighing them down was gone. But as soon as they let out that breath, the situation changed again. Beast's eyes shot open with intense hatred and bloodlust. With a long cry, its entire body of scales bristled. There was a subtle change that came with the long, sharp cry that ended within a moment. The people holding the nets felt a strong vibration coming from the nets. Danger. Then the next moment after that thought flashed through the warrior's mind, sounds of bones breaking were heard. Fresh blood gushed out from their hands. The gap between their index fingers and thumbs split open, revealing white bones. Snap! The first part of the rope broke. The damage was too much for the shaman to repair it. Like a chain reaction, the rest of the rope started doing the same. Snap, snap, snap. The continuous snaps sounded like fireworks going off. The nets fell off the beast, dropping or exploding in all directions, bringing along some warriors with it. How is this happening? Bogu couldn't believe what he was seeing. The burn move was known as the killer move of the Gu tribe. Nothing was supposed to be able to escape from it. The chilly eyes of the beast swept the room, stopping at the figure at the fire pond. Thud! The stomp on the ground split open the ground, sending stones and dirt flying everywhere. Another long whistle was let loose. The huge beast stomped a foot onto the ground. It radiated an aura that could only be described as murderous. Swoosh! With a sound as if the sky cracked open, the beast's head was knocked to the side, causing it to lose the aura it had been building up. A green spear sliced through the beast's face from its eyelid to its lip. It nearly got its eye. The handle of the spear was as thick as a person's arm, made from some unknown wood. The spearhead had an odd green to it that had it seem extra cold in the hot sun. Dark red blood came gushing out. The stone tools that the Gu tribe had used didn't manage to cut open the skin, but this spear did it. The huge beast turned its focus to this spear. It seemed that it didn't expect to get injured by humans either. Chapter 648. You can't help us. With such a blow to its head, the beast stopped looking at the shaman at the fire pond and turned to the direction the spear was thrown. Up in the sky, there was an eagle. The beast let out an angry roar. The eagle shrieked back teasingly. It did not approach but did not leave either. The beast growled. Perhaps it wanted to get rid of the eagle immediately but couldn't reach that high into the sky. The sudden appearance of the spear shocked the Gu people. They had no such weapon in their tribe. They had only seen the flaming horn people wield something like that. They saw the green weapons on them a few days ago. They looked at the eagle. The flaming horns who visited a few days ago had an eagle too. Is it them, the flaming horn tribe? Didn't they leave? Why are they here again? The others were guessing, but the shaman knew it was them. He could feel the flaming horn fire seed aura coming from the hidden tribe people in the forest. Swoosh! Another spear came flying towards the beast, except this time the beast moved to dodge it. The spear was aimed at its eyes, but it landed on its forehead, which was the strongest part on its head. The skin cracked but no blood flowed. The skin cracked. It really cracked. This was the first time it bled since its appearance. The people near the beast had no time to move. With all its attention directed upwards, it moved backwards without thought. Bogu's arm was injured because he stood too close to the beast's. The bones in his legs were cracked from the vibrations of the beast stomping around. He wanted to move out of the way, but he fell instead. Just as he was about to touch the ground, A hand swiftly grabbed him by his shirt. He was then dragged and tossed far away by a strong force. Bogu was speechless. Such roughness probably meant that it wasn't someone from the Gu tribe. Bogu turned to see the figure that stood behind him. His eyes widened in shock. The Grand Elder of Flaming Horn? The person that threw Bogu was indeed Shashwan, but he aimed Bogu towards the direction where other Gu tribe members were standing so they could catch him. Boom! Another step from the huge beast caused the gap in the ground to widen. Shashwan had already jumped up before the beast took another step. He grabbed onto a rope from the Gu tribe and spun himself midair to change his direction. He had to keep moving. It was dangerous to stay in one place for too long. The first spear was thrown by him. He couldn't go and retrieve it. It was too risky. The beast has it scarred up now. It wouldn't let him near it. Shashwan had no confidence in facing a beast with such power currently, and he was in no rush to get his spear back. They didn't have any more spears to strike now, but the distraction gave the Gu tribe members enough time to catch their breath. "Why are you here?" Someone that was carrying Bogu asked a nearby Flaming Horn tribesperson. Olwo didn't look away from the beast while replying. "Our Grand Elder said that you may need our help, so we're here." Why would he think that? Because he is the Grand Elder. This answer made it hard for Bogu to continue asking questions. He couldn't tell what their intentions were, but he was still grateful towards them. The truth was that most of the Flaming Horn tribe members wanted to stay anyway, but after Shashwan did some not divination, he immediately ordered the ships to change their course and head back. The shaman looked at Shashwan. Before he could convey his gratefulness, he made a decision. The Gu people that had just caught their breaths got up once again. The battle hasn't ended. The beast had broken a lot of the nets, but many were still on its body. However, those nets didn't have much effect on it alone, so they had to add on or repair the nets so that it worked efficiently. Bogu's position has already been replaced by someone else. He didn't have any ability to fight now, so he could only watch from afar. "Do you need any more help?" asked Chio. "No, thank you so much, we can do the rest," said Bogu. The Flaming Horn tribe appeared at the correct moment to give the Gu tribe the time they needed. What they had to do now was just follow the shaman's orders to add on the nets. Would they really succeed just like that? Bogu felt uneasy. Although they gained experience after the first wave of attacks, many of them were injured now, so their movements were restricted. The beast was getting too close to the center of the tribe. This didn't leave much time for the others. "Do you really not need help?" Chio asked again. They really wanted to do more. Although they weren't sure they could kill it, they were willing to try. They did the same for similar beasts they found in the forest. Bogu shook his head and said, "No, you really can't help us." This made Chio unhappy, but they had to admit it was true. It wasn't that beneficial for the Flaming Horn tribe people to move now. For starters, the Gu tribe Fire Sea Dora was too strong for them in the center. This would affect their strength greatly. They would need their full powers when facing a beast like this. Their years of hunting experience told them that any slight mistake here would cost them their lives. It wouldn't be worth it for them to lose their life over a battle that wasn't theirs. Secondly, the Gu tribe was working as one unit despite the number of people. The Flaming Horn people would mess up their coordination if they joined. Knowing that, Chio and the others didn't move forwards but only helped the occasionally injured warrior out. No one could badmouth the Flaming Horns for this. This was considered a very kind gesture compared to how other tribes would have acted. For now, they could really only just watch and wait. No. Something's not right. Chio realized something. Their Grand Elder wasn't back yet. Chapter 649, Net Attack. Shashwan stayed on the battlefield. It wasn't because he was nosy. He really had just planned to give some time to the Gu tribe people to catch their breaths. Among all the Flaming Horn tribe members, he was probably the one that was least affected by the fire seed of the tribe. That was why he could venture so deep into the battlefield. As he saw the tribe people getting ready to fight again, Shashwan started to move out of the way until he heard a voice. Wait. There was no one beside him. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, as if someone was talking beside him. It was the shaman. He was using a special technique to tell Shashwan and the rest to stay and help them. Maybe because the shaman saw that Shashwan wasn't affected by the fire seed, or maybe he saw the effectiveness of the two spears. The shaman knew that only the Flaming Horn Tribe's people would be able to do any damage to the beast. The shaman knew that the tribe would be indebted to the Flaming Horn Tribe after this, but now wasn't the time to discuss how they would repay them. Shashwan agreed. He would listen to the shaman's orders for now. Front claw. Shashwan crouched as he ran, then slid towards the beast's front claw. The beast was looking in another direction, so Shashwan used this opportunity to cut its claw. Shing! The deafening sound of metals colliding rung in everyone's ears. The shiny scales that covered the beast's claw flew everywhere. Shashwan felt a numbness from his wrist to his shoulder on his sword-wielding hand. Tough. That was Shashwan's first thought. He didn't feel the reaction force when he threw the spear, but now he was feeling the full effect of it. No matter how strong or how sharp a sword was, it would be nothing compared to the scales on that beast. With such strong defenses, even if 200 Flaming Horn warriors attacked it at once, it would take some time to wear it down. This beast. Shashwan suddenly thought of something. He felt that this beast was different from the beasts they encountered. Even the large beast they showed off in the banquet was small compared to it. This reminded Shashwan of the Bat King he saw many years ago. It was so quick that the warriors couldn't catch it. The beast before him wasn't built for speed, nor was it agile. It couldn't even fly, so on paper it was nothing compared to the beasts he faced before. However, this was much stronger and tougher to fight than anything he hunted before. This was nearly as powerful as the Bat King he faced a few years back, and that was scary enough. Its defense was way too strong. Usually, long necks are the weak points of beasts, but this beast had its neck covered in those impenetrable scales. No wonder it could live for 1,000 years. The shaman didn't know what Shashwan was thinking about. He was fully focused on adding on the nets on the beast. He spared a glance to see the damage Shashwan had done on the beast. What a sharp weapon. What material was that? How did they get it? The two spears and the sword he was holding was much different from stone weapons. That was impressive. However, it was a pity that the Flaming Horn Tribe wouldn't be able to take down the beast. The Gu Tribe still had to rely on themselves. The Flaming Horn Tribe was the only backup. The skin on the beast's claw was very thick, much thicker than the skin on its face. Even with such a strike from Shashwan, no blood was seen at its claw. It probably didn't feel much pain from the cut too. However, it was still enough to distract it. After the slash, Shashwan immediately moved away from the beast to avoid its retaliation. The stomp from the beast crushed all the stones nearby into dust, cracking open the ground once again, sending large gaps to the ground everywhere. The place the Gu tribe once called home was now unrecognizable. Outside the battlefield, Ogwang held a bow as tall as herself, ready to shoot at the beast. She was being extra careful as the other archers, as they soon realized that the Gu tribe members were everywhere, so it was very easy to accidentally shoot them. The Grand Elder told us to not attack for now, just help out any wounded warriors you see. Kutu looked worriedly at the battlefield. He didn't care for the Gu tribe. He was worried about Shashwan. Brother Zhuan isn't someone impulsive. He knows what he is doing. We should stay at the side so that he can call us over whenever he needs us. Ogwang let her bow down, but she didn't place the arrow back into the quiver. In the battlefield, Shah Zhuan went straight for a strike at the beast's hind legs. He left a mark, and this time it bled a little, but it was nothing impactful. Shashwan wanted to slash a few more times at the same spot to thoroughly cut through its skin, but there was no opportunity to do so. The beast seemed to be aware of every cut it got to. It would purposely hide it away to let it heal. Shashwan's wish to cut at the same spot was also much harder because he had to cooperate with the Gu tribe too. He couldn't do whatever he wanted. Giving up on that thought, Shashwan observed the Gu tribe members while waiting for his next order. Anyone that didn't have an understanding of how nets or traps worked would have no idea what they were doing. Hundreds of figures surrounded the beast with ropes streaming around like odd-colored snakes. The ropes crisscrossed and were tied to each other. then tightly coiled over the beast. The warriors worked very quickly to repair all the nets. The originally damaged net was soon returning to its original form. Then, it was once again lit on fire, causing a new round of burn marks to appear on the beast. Why did Shashwan risk his life to help them? Well, he definitely had his own reasons. This was his first time being able to see such a complex net being built up close. Hearing stories and seeing the completed thing was one thing and seeing the process was another. Random ropes became a net and the net was connected into a larger one that was used to repair the huge one. Although their bronze weapons were able to cut through the skin, they wouldn't be able to bring such damage to the beast in such a short time. The net was the thing that was able to hold the beast back. It wrapped around it, forming a seal of sorts, which made it hard for the beast to move. Shashwan didn't see how the beast came ashore, but he could guess that it was much more quick and agile than now. The fire seemed to have made its muscles more tense and rigid. Everywhere the fire nets touched was now charred black. The scales that were so hard to poke through with sharp tools were succumbing under the flames. This was still a rather damaged net. One could only imagine how powerful the full net would be. A long time ago, Shashwan had learned about some trap making from Old K. Old K had taught him some tips that were very effective during hunting, leading him to think he knew everything there was to know, but now he realized how wrong he was. This was what he lacked, this more detailed, complicated and stronger power move. But he needed a net this large to actually do it. The beast stood on its hind legs and used its claws to grab at the nets around its neck while letting out a frustrated roar. The warriors holding that part of the net were sent flying off with their arms bleeding. As the broken pieces of the net fell, it still carried flames on it. A small piece flew towards Shashwan. Shashwan grabbed rope, which was still glowing red from heat and sizzling. Shashwan accidentally burnt his hand from grabbing the piece. He felt pain from the fire and the repulsion from the other tribe's fire seed immediately, but they soon subdued. The rope continued to glow. However, the burning sensation stopped just like the repulsion. Within his sea of consciousness, Shashwan's totemic flames had become very active since he touched the rope. It was a natural reaction due to repulsion against foreign totemic power. Then, the outer shell in his mind's totemic fire glowed. Both the flaming horn fire seed within Shashwan and the goo fire seed's powers in the rope seemed to gradually quieten down. Shashwan observed the rope in his arms that was still glowing from the fire. The redness was much duller now. The flame much weaker too. The red on the rope was blood. Blood and fire came from the same source. The blood was the bait and the rope was the medium. They were using their fire seed to fight against the beast. Chapter 650, Repairman. Just as the net was nearly completed, the beast ripped open a new hole. Although the beast had been injured and was weaker now, this was still a big loss to the Goo tribe. There wasn't much time left. The net could slow down the beast, but the beast was still moving forward. The shaman didn't show any signs of panic in a glance, but if one looked closely, they could notice the fear in his eyes. As the leader of the Goo tribe, he cannot panic. He had to ground himself. Come on, come on, come on, the shaman chanted in his heart. Boom. The beast took another step forward. The act of ripping off the net on its neck brought more damage to the beast than Shashwan did with a sword. Ripping off the net twice took quite a toll on the beast. In a battle of endurance, the Goo tribe would lose against the beast. Its biggest weapon was its incredible defense. In addition to that, the beast was already winning this fight. If they couldn't repair the web before the beast reached the fire pond, the Goo tribe would be doomed. Even if it didn't extinguish their fire seed, if it just injured or killed the shaman, the Goo tribe would be done for. The claws dug deep into the ground. Every attack it got, it would take a step forward. Its only goal was to charge forward. Maybe it knew that it couldn't take a third round of the nets, so it really just had to focus on moving forward. That was its goal for 1,000 years. Head straight to the fire seed and kill all that surrounded the fire seed. The shaman's calm facade came crumbling down. It isn't enough. There isn't enough time, thought the shaman. He used his deduction skills to predict what would happen if this continued. Big drops of sweat fell from the shaman's face, his eyes bloodshot now, his facial muscles cramping up from biting his teeth too hard. What now? What now? As the shaman was deep in thought, he heard a voice. Do you just need to repair that hole? Shashwan didn't have powers like the shaman, so he could only shout. Between the loud stomping from the beast, the shaman could clearly hear Shashwan. He wasn't sure what Shashwan was asking exactly, but he just answered anyway. Yes, it doesn't matter what way I use it. Yes, the shaman wanted to roar out. If they could fully repair the net, they would succeed. If they failed, well, it wouldn't be pretty. The shaman's mind was only filled with thoughts of repairing the net. That was why he replied Shashwan that quickly. Shashwan whistled and shouted to Chuo, "Throw my bag here." The flaming horn people were all feeling the burning sensation from both the beast's aura and the Gu tribe's fire seed. They didn't think much and just complied with what Shashwan told them to do. The beast and the Gu people didn't notice what Shashwan was doing. He quickly opened it and took something out. Shashwan, what are you doing? Wei and Chuo looked over at him. They were shocked to see his injured arm. It's nothing. Don't worry, I'm not reckless. Shashwan quickened his movements. Wei knew exactly what those kinds of sentences usually meant. Grand Elder, roared Wei. This was just the Gu tribe. They really didn't need to risk their lives. I calculated it. I'm not diving in blind. I want to prove something also. Don't come close. As soon as he was done speaking, he rushed towards the beast. Repair the net. But where? The biggest hole was right at the beast's neck. Looking at the beast get closer and closer, Shashwan let out a strong exhale, energy exploding out of his fingertips. Each move was carefully calculated. 2 boomerangs with a thin string tied to it were shot out, making a perfect arching flight path that circled around the beast's neck. It was lucky that the beast didn't pay much attention to the string like that. Shashwan jumped up to catch the boomerangs. He changed the angle and directions and threw it out once again. He was repairing the net. The Gu people who were able to tell what Shashwan was doing were grateful, but was this even useful? A wire that broke in the middle can conduct electricity if it was repaired, but not if it was repaired with an insulator. Right now, the Gu tribe was seriously doubting that the strings Shashwan was using could be used to make a net. To do what they did, they must use rope that had undergone the ritual they conducted. Only those kinds of nets were able to catch fire. Why didn't someone give some of our rope to that flaming horn man? Some complained in their hearts. The shaman suddenly got what Shashwan was doing, but it was too late. Unless he can ignite it too? The shaman held out hope for Shashwan. No way. The shaman dismissed the idea. Shashwan couldn't channel the power of the Gu fire seed. How would he light it on fire? After some quick thinking, the shaman made a decision. Retreat. It was too late. He had to use all his powers and borrow the energy from the fire seed to wound the beast. He had to try to at least injure it if he couldn't kill it. If it was injured, the Gu people would at least have some time to run away. Since the beast wouldn't be able to extinguish their fire seed, as long as it's there, they still had a chance to be reborn. They could always train another shaman. As long as there's a chance to survive, the shaman would take it. Hearing the shaman's words, the Gu people knew what he was going to do. They stopped fighting the beast. They knew it wasn't necessary to make another sacrifice that didn't change anything. The shaman twisted the disc's handle so the disc would face downwards. The disc was still pointed in the beast's direction. He muttered something under his breath, preparing for this one last attack. A sharp noise like metal being cut through rang throughout the forest. It was so piercing that people felt their eardrums about to puncture. It stopped the shaman's chanting. The Gu people covered their eyes while twisting their bodies to see what was happening. The strings around the beast's neck were rapidly tying knots around it to form a net. The string let out a blood-red glow under the sunlight. Shashwan held one end in his hand while the other was already in a knot. He pulled it forcefully. With every tug, the knot on the other end got closer to the beast, tightening around its neck. The sharp sound came from the friction between the tightening string and the beast's neck. Everyone's heart was beating out of their hearts. What was this flaming horn man trying to do? Trying to repair the net was hopeless. The shaman gave up on that too. Why was he so stubborn? Although they thought that Shashwan was just wasting his energy, The Gu tribe's people still felt moved from his actions. The beast shifted its gaze to the person standing in front of a flame not too far away. Kill, kill. The beast didn't stop heading towards the fire pond, but it swayed its neck to throw off the person holding the string. Although the large force did jerk Szechuan up, he was still holding on to his end of the string. He flew up like a kite in the sky. The onlookers watched nervously, not knowing what to do. Szechuan, who was up in the sky, was much calmer than those below. A voice in his mind told him that he could do it. The totemic flame in his mind roared up, emitting a brilliant light. It mixed into the energy from the fire seed in his blood, lighting up the blood. Whoosh! Szechuan was now engulfed in flames. The brilliant flame followed the path of the string down. Just like a lightning strike, it headed straight towards the beast's neck.